Function maybe at home. Just grabbing the sign-in sheet for the public comment. Anyone else? Good. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm not. Folks, so this is a joint meeting of the planning board and the city council's planning and development committee. Because of some of these items are committee of the whole, that means that possibly all the councilors are here. I think almost all are here this evening. So with that, I defer to the two co-chairs.
So to open the planning board portion of this, this is the planning board meeting of April 6th. I'm going to open our meeting with Paul, Brian Balcom
Here.
Jen Bluestein,
Here.
Alden Clark,
Here.
Charlie Palmisano,
Here.
Jamie Pennington,
Here.
Rick Tainter,
Here.
Jack LeClaire,
Here.
Matt Heffron,
Here.
and I am here.
I think you might have said April.
Sorry?
I think you might have said April 20th versus April.
Yeah, I can't hear you, Chair.
Actually, it's April 15th.
That's it.
Yep.
Okay. Would you like to open?
I'm Ben Hartman. I'm the chair of Planning and Development Subcommittee of the City Council. I'm joined to my left by Strzok and Nikodic, which gives us a quorum of the committee. In addition, we're joined by Councilors Cameron, Medina Smith, Delay, and Hall, as co-sponsors of items on the agenda tonight. This is our meeting of April 15th, 2026.
So this is as Andy said, this is a joint public hearing. We are going to be talking about 3 proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance this evening. Just a word about format tonight. We're going to have a presentation of all 3 proposed amendments first. There will be some discussion by Planning and Development Committee, members of the City Council, and the Planning Board following those presentations, after which I will open the floor to public comment. Hopefully all of your names are on the list here for public comment. We will be asking you to limit your comments to about 2 minutes if you can. Quite a number of people who speak tonight like to move things along. After that, after the public comment, we will close public comment. We will deliberate planning board and planning and development committee, city council members, and along this so with that, I think I would invite the proponents of the individual zoning amendments to
Just If you're having trouble hearing in the back, we don't have amplified sound. There's plenty of seats up in the front, so if you want to move forward, feel free. The presenters will, I hope, do their best to project, but also, if you came in late, we do have a sign-up sheet. Happy to welcome your name to be added to that.
If I could just throw in there, if it's not too much trouble, just for a reminder for folks in the audience, there are 3 separate zoning amendments, so you may be interested in speaking to one or more of those. I did throw onto our general public comment slide a quick reference to each of those by docket number, so that may be helpful to folks for reference. But at any rate, recognizing if you're commenting on them, they're not all together as one package. They're separate zoning amendments that have been proposed. We'll start with one.
Okay. The amendment to the downtown overlay district definitions. It is the simplest ordinance you will hear tonight. So, next slide. Newburyport became nationally famous for historic preservation when it restored rather than razed its downtown during the days of urban renewal. Our downtown became vulnerable to teardowns again after urban renewal protections expired. To remedy this, in 2014, the City Council unanimously enacted the Downtown Overlay District, DOD. A sponsor of today's ordinance, Ed Cameron, was chair of the Planning and Development Committee at the time. Demolition of historic buildings is generally prohibited in the DOD. Every application for the demolition or alteration of a historic building and every application for new construction must go to the Historical Commission for an advisory report to the Planning Board. It's a special permit granting authority in the DOD. Demolition excluded from DOD requirements is only subject to Historical Commission review for a 12-month demolition delay. The definition of a historic building includes a building listed as contributory to the Newburyport Historic District as of August 2nd, 1984. The term district data sheets is not in the definition. However, 42-year-old district data sheets submitted with the 1984 nomination are used for reference. What are the district data sheets? The entire Newburyport National Register District is much larger than the downtown. Its nomination was a massive effort undertaken by the planning office and volunteers. 2,700 buildings had to be identified, dated, and described. Although many were described in detail through inventory forms, most were only nominal. The district data sheets still used by the planning office today are 326 typed pages with handwritten notes. When the work began in 1980, a structure built before 1930 was 50 years old, the state and national standard for a historic building. The district data sheets were supposed to be updated to capture other buildings as they aged, but they weren't. Although the Massachusetts Historical Commission does not have gradations of contributory, the district data sheets include markings of C for contributing, MC for minor, or INT for intrusion, based on building age in 1984. There is no record from 2014 of the city councils having considered any difference between minor contributing and contributing, or even that they were aware of those terms. 42 years later, we can't talk to the people who created the district data sheets, but we can rationally wonder if there were errors. For example, 17 downtown buildings dated 1930 or earlier were marked MC, including the Knights of Pythias Lodge, now Agave, was Agave. Also, a well-loved 1796 church on Harris Street before it burned down 1 year before the nomination. In all, there are 20 buildings marked MC in the 1984 district data sheets, buildings still part of the downtown's historic sense of place. Last February, the zoning administrator interpreted that a building marked MC was not contributory, therefore not historic. Based on this interpretation, 20 downtown buildings could be raised by right after only a 1-year delay. But there is no evidence that minor contributing was intended to mean not contributing or not contributory. The simple amendment proposed to the DOD definitions will prevent this and make moot a current appeal before the ZBA.
Next, we have number 218.
Okay, I'm going to present this too. I do have two co-sponsors here, Councilor Medina Smith and Councilor Hall. So ordinance 218 is also simple. It does not create any new zoning regulations. It just adds language to our local zoning ordinance to make clear applicants, public, and land use board members what the ZBA and planning board may and already do consider when granting zoning relief as part of their discretionary authority. It also affirms for everyone what the sponsors hope is city policy, the protection and promotion of housing diversity and neighborhood character. What is discretionary authority? When the ZBA and planning board permit a project, their discretionary authority is allowed for and called for by state and local law. What is city policy? The city council establishes policy through legislation such as zoning ordinance. The council can be guided by master plan long-term goals, which, although not binding, reflect a substantial process involving the council, the administration, and citizens. Although the usual timescale for master plans is every 10 years, Newburyport has had just 2 master plans in the last 25 years, in 2001 and 2017. If you read both of them, 25 years of planning priorities, what you will frequently see are concerns the city still has now. One concern is the conversion of existing housing stock into much larger buildings through either expansion or replacement. There are multiple examples of this and of concerns for housing diversity and affordability. And also throughout, concern for the character of existing neighborhoods. Newburyport is not alone in having these concerns. In 2008, in a 2008 decision, the state's highest court recognized the problem of mansionization and upheld the autonomy of communities and the discretionary authority of local land use boards to limit it. The Supreme Judicial Court did not define starter homes in its decision, but recognized the expansion of smaller houses into significantly larger ones in cases coming before local courts. Our ZBA takes Bjorklund into consideration when reviewing special permits for non-conforming. Zoning law has a long history of allowing for aesthetic consideration. In Britain versus Gloucester, the Massachusetts Appeals Court upheld a zoning board decision that, because of the added volume and increased height, an addition would be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. The court said the board may properly base a decision on aesthetic considerations. In written public comment on this ordinance, ZBA member Jared Eigerman citing written as rational human beings, we also consider beauty, including architectural quality, sometimes called aesthetics. However, although it is settled law that we can consider aesthetics, we avoid saying the word. Mr. Eigerman has openly been our advisor. In addition to being a ZBA member, he is a land use attorney and former city councilor who co-sponsored many local zoning reforms in response to issues raised in our master plan. So to the ordinance. Ordinance 218, as introduced, proposed only an addition to the existing language shown on this slide for findings in special permit for nonconformity cases. The new language is to add findings for all structures, including multifamily buildings. This addition does two things. One, makes clear that Newburyport boards may limit the adverse effects of projects which significantly expand smaller houses. Two, extends to all buildings the aesthetic considerations already in place for 1 and 2 family. The language of both paragraphs has been changed since the ordinance was introduced. These changes are based on early public comment and preliminary advice from the city solicitor. In paragraph 1, the Supreme Judicial Court decision in Bjorklund is cited. The underlined words are direct quotes from the Bjorklund decision. In paragraph 2, aesthetic considerations are enumerated. Longtime planning board member and city planner Rick Tainter submitted early written public comment and recommendations. At his recommendation, we have added language to our zoning section on purpose. The existing purposes under this section are shown on this slide. The two added purposes Mr. Tainter recommends support consideration of the same policy concerns that we have for special permits for nonconformities in all discretionary zoning reviews. We think it is a good addition, and thank you, Mr. Tainter. Ordinance 218 with these amendments was first discussed in the Planning and Development Committee on April 7th. The feedback we heard was, shouldn't starter homes be defined rather than leaving this, as the Supreme Judicial Court does, to board discretion? But then again, shouldn't this be changed to smaller homes? Not all small homes are needed by those starting out. And in that case, shouldn't smaller homes be defined? Co-sponsor Medina Smith did research to find the options shown. Additional feedback was, shouldn't the new paragraph in section C, quoting the Bjorklund case, be in section A instead, because section A addresses single and 2 family houses? It is the existing language in section A at odds in any way with the neighborhood character language in the second paragraph of section C. Finally, I need to clean up a mistake I made when updating the language in the second paragraph of section C. Although we had preliminary input from the city solicitor, the final language of the ordinance will be fully reviewed by the city solicitor before the council is asked to vote. Councilor Medina Smith, Councilor Hall, and I look forward to planning board and additional public input tonight. Thank you.
And lastly, we have 221.
This one is going to be a little bit of a longer presentation. It is somewhat more complex. So my co-sponsor, Councilor July, and I will be tag teaming this, and we are going to do our best to explain this clearly and in as plain language as we can. If you have been following since the beginning, what you're going to hear tonight reflects some significant changes that we have made due to feedback. I'm not going to assume that everyone here has been following along since the beginning, because I think you have lives that you enjoy. So I will do my best to make this clear for everyone in the room as if you hadn't been here. So our ordinance 221 is a zoning amendment aimed at preserving our stock of smaller, naturally occurring affordable homes and discouraging mansionization. It is something that we have heard, Councilor Delia heard a lot from residents that they are very, very concerned about in the city. A note about what we mean by naturally occurring affordable homes. We are not talking about subsidized affordable housing. We are just talking about the fact, plain and simple, that smaller homes tend to be more affordable than larger homes. And when we have a diversity of housing stock, then we have some more affordable options comparatively across the city. So the problem we are working to solve is one of affordability and availability of these smaller homes. The region in general, Newburyport specifically, we have a critical shortage of affordable housing. What we are proposing here is not going to solve that problem just like that, but we are targeting a very, very specific piece. And these naturally affordable homes, what we're talking about are smaller single-family houses, duplexes, two families, whether they're top, bottom, or side by side, and also multifamily homes. These homes are dwindling as properties are redeveloped across the city and the region into large single-family homes. That shortage of starter homes makes it really difficult for many people in our community to find a spot here or to keep their spot here. We tend to think of starter homes as being for families, couples that are having a baby or they're growing their family. It's workforce housing for nurses and teachers, and firefighters, and the people who keep this city running, who keep our restaurants running. But starter home might be a little bit of a misnomer because older residents are also looking for this size of home. Many of them have raised their families and they're sort of stuck right now in a home with 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. Their kids are gone. They want to stay here, but there is nowhere for them to go. So they are also looking for some of these smaller homes. We are hoping to solve this with some zoning tweaks because what we find is that our current zoning incentivizes building oversized single-family homes by allowing heights that are 35 feet in our R2 district. That is quite tall, and that allows these homes to sort of balloon outward and sometimes tower over their neighbors. At the same time, we are hoping to, the zoning as it currently exists tends to make it more difficult to build a modest-sized duplex. Small, 2 side-by-side family homes that could blend into neighborhoods, but these are discouraged by our zoning. So we're losing out on some of that form of more naturally affordable housing as well. To get us grounded in what we're looking at and what our constituents has told us the problem is, we have some examples, some photos, and Councilor Delia is gonna share these with us.
Thank you. The old adage is a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you want to go ahead and bring these up, I think what I would like for people to look at as they're examining these examples, I'm not going to go into gory detail about the statistics on the bottom. You can read those and you can see what came before and what came after, what was there before, what came after. I think what I would ask people to sort of look at is the lost opportunity of potentially taking these lots and instead of focusing on a single family home, the lost opportunity to have potentially, as Councilor Chalk mentioned, potentially having a side-by-side duplex 2 families. So instead of a large home that houses just one family, potentially using that mass and using that lot area to create the opportunity for 2 families to be able to occupy these homes in our R2. So this is one that's in Ward 1 on Lincoln Street. The next example is actually from Ward 4. Again, when you look at the massing, what was there before, what's there afterwards, you can see the opportunity that would have existed had we had the right incentives in place and the right zoning rules in place. We can see what might have possibly been an opportunity to create 2 side-by-side instead of a large single family home. And the third example, the most dramatic, is from Ward 6 on Roosevelt Place, where we had a small, about 1,400 square foot home that when redeveloped became over 6,000 square feet again, when you look at the size of that structure, you can imagine that it could have very easily have been, with the right incentives and the right rules in place, it could have been two side-by-side single-family homes or convertible duplex as well, two-family home.
Go ahead. So that brings us to the goal of what we're trying to accomplish here. It is two-part, and the parts balance, we're working to strike a balance to have them work together. The first goal is to preserve smaller homes where we can. And that is done by adjusting the height limits in our zoning and applying the concept of a floor area ratio. I'm going to ask you to hold, please, for that definition, but it basically adjusts the size of the home based on the size of the lot. It is not a new concept. We do it on Plum Island already for different reasons, and other communities across the state do it. We'll dig into the numbers and talk about what that looks like in a minute. Alongside seeking to preserve smaller homes and to keep them intact. The flip side is that if that is not possible or not desirable for a builder or the owner of a lot, then we would like to offer an alternative where we encourage two-family homes as a viable alternative. A couple ways to make this a more attractive possibility is by equalizing the lot size requirements for two-family homes so that they are the same as what we have for single-family homes in this district. We are also adjusting our floor area ratio requirement so you could build a larger building, but as long as you split it into two families. So this would allow us to have two more modest homes instead of just one large one. These goals are spelled out in our master plan, and I've quoted it here. That states from 2017, we want to diversify Newburyport's housing stock, and we want to avoid the creation of enclaves of poverty or wealth or uniform concentration of housing types. So if we lose all of our, smaller homes and our mix of two families and single families, we are at risk of having an enclave of giant single family homes, and one could argue an enclave of wealth in neighborhoods that once have offered a diversity of housing choice. Next slide. So this is the high level bullet points of the changes we seek to make. And this is where, if you have been following along, you will notice changes. We are going to dig into those changes as we go tonight, but I just wanted to outline them here. So first, we propose to reduce the height of single family homes in the R2 district. You'll notice, if you have been paying attention, that we cut out R3E3. So that's not on the table. It didn't, after working with the planning office, we found that that did not sufficiently target or effectively target where this problem exists. We seek to define gross floor area so that we can clarify and inform the floor area ratio calculations. You will see spelled out, we have made changes to that definition since we last met. We want to limit single family homes in R2 outside the DCOD to a floor area ratio of 0.25 or 1,850 square feet, whichever is greater. That probably is the biggest change. There are several pieces there. In a second, we'll get to how the DCOD plays into this because we've targeted different areas and neighborhoods with these changes, and we are excluding other areas where we don't think that this mansionization issue is as prevalent. And that happens to be within the DCOD. We'll look at it in a second. You'll also see that we are offering an alternative to the floor area ratio calculation. It's something Councilor Delay and I have been just sort of casually calling the small lot exemption. And we'll see how that works in a moment as well. We also propose to equalize lot area, frontage, and side yard requirements for two family homes in R2 outside the DCOD, and limiting two family homes in R2 outside of the DCOD to a floor area ratio of 0.40. So those are the headlines, and we will dig into the details in a minute. But before we get there, I did want to take a look at the map. So R2 is the yellow that used to be here. The pale sort of creamy colored yellow is R1. The bright yellow is R2. As you can see, it is most of Newburyport. A note about what you're not seeing on this map, you are not seeing Plum Island because there is no R2 there. You are not seeing west of I-95 because there's no R2 over there. So the map is just focused on the areas of Newburyport that are in R2. Portions, a good chunk of our R2 zone is also the D cut. And that area, thank you, is our more sort of traditional historic neighborhoods. The homes are closer together, the lots are smaller, they're older, and those areas, in speaking with the planning office, really is not where our mansionization troubles are focused. So we have changed our thinking on this to focus on R2 outside of the DCOD, and I spent a little time outlining those so you could hopefully see them a little better to see exactly what we are talking about. For the most part, we're talking about these neighborhoods between Low Street and High Street, stretching over into the sort of Three Roads area. There's a couple little bits closer to 95. There's a section on the other side of Atkinson Common, and there is Cherry Street and sort of east of Perkins Park towards the Newburyport. And those are where our examples came from. Ward 4 example was in the neighborhood by Anna Jakes. The Ward 6 example was out in the Three Roads neighborhood, and the Ward 1 example is by Perkins Park. So those are the areas where we're seeing the trouble, and we were working to focus it. We also were using, and we'll talk about it in a little bit of detail later, but we found that it was convenient and it would streamline this zoning decision to use lines we have already drawn for the DCOD. So that is why we have chosen that in conjunction with the planning office. And that brings us to the actual wording of the amendment. And you'll see a lot of red in the markup because it's a work in progress. Councilor Delay is going to go through that. We're going to zip through the wording pretty quickly so we can dig into what the words mean. So go ahead.
Yes. And also thank you, shout out to the planning office, because I think it was rather brilliant to point us in the direction of the DCOD. Several of folks that gave us feedback said, why not just do an overlay? When we looked at where the DCOD and outside the DCOD, it seemed like an overlay had already sort of been created as a carve out within the DCOD. And so it seemed to make a lot of sense because that is the area that is really has been the subject of much of the mansionization. So in terms of the amendment, as Councilor Chalk mentioned, the red line, the first thing I would just point out is that we had a request to establish an effective date. And so here we have some language in here that essentially we'll talk a little bit more about, but it gives an effective date of when this would go into effect so that projects that are currently in the pipeline would not be adversely impacted. That second piece is about the gross floor area definition. It certainly was not lost on us how critical this definition is to the calculation of floor area ratio. So we did refine that definition, and we think that we have created exclusions that make sense, and we'll go into more detail on that definition as well. And lastly, in terms of dimensional use table itself, as Councilor Chalk mentioned, we did eliminate the R3B3 from consideration. We're leaving that alone. We'll go into more detail, but we did create an R2 within the DCOD, and that is generally exempted from what we're proposing versus the R2 outside the DCOD. And the changes specifically. So we will start with the effective date grandfathering provision. Again, many of you brought to our attention that there are a certain amount of projects already in the pipeline. It was certainly not our intention to impact those adversely. So we have excluded applications that were already filed with the zoning administrator and awaiting any planning board or ZBA hearing as of the date of advertising of this hearing, which was March 31st, 2026. In terms of gross floor area, again, very, very well aware of how this impacts a little too fast for myself. How this impacts the calculation of floor area ratio. It is obviously the numerator, so it is a very an important part of that calculation. And we wanted to be mindful of what makes sense to include in gross floor area and what makes sense to exclude. And so specifically, what we're looking at excluding are basements that are 50% or more below grade. While this is living area, our primary concern is the massing that we see above ground, not what we see below ground. So we're going to exempt or exclude basements. Attics that are below 6 feet in height tend to be also not living space. It tends to be storage space. We are exempting that from the definition. We are also exempting detached ADUs. We had never had any intent of including them, but we want to make sure that that's crystal clear. We're exempting up to 528 square feet of garage space, again, not living area, so we're excluding that. And the parameters of 528 square feet approximates a two-car garage. And finally, we're also excluding up to 200 square feet of an additional accessory structure, namely a shed. Is what you could think of as a shed. Again, this is in response to the feedback that we received from architects, builders, realtors. We think it better aligns to what is actually used as livable space and provides flexibility for these other uses that sometimes occur on a property. DCOD differentiation, again, this creates essentially two tiers. We have an R2 outside the DCOD and an R2 within the DCOD. As we said, as it turns out, when we looked at where the DCOD is and we looked at where we're experiencing mansionization, it did seem to be a delineation of where we wanted to apply these new dimensional requirements. So R2 within the DCOD has just one proposed change, and that is the height of the single family from 35 feet to 25 feet, which we think is more in keeping with what exists presently in these neighborhoods.
Counselor, like to 30.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, R2 within the DCOD oh no, that's for,
The height, and we'll get to the height in more detail later, but I just wanted to, within the DCOD, we had made it higher. We'll get to it.
yes, within the DCOD, yes.
I just wanted to correct you on that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, so within the DCOD, instead of going to 35 feet, which is what it was at, we changed that to 30 feet. Everything else within the DCOD and the R2 remains exactly as it was before we proposed this change. For R2 outside the DCOD, we have several proposed changes, and that we'll go into more detail of that. But the single family height goes from 35 feet down to 25 feet, and we have added a requirement for a floor area ratio. In addition, we have also adjusted, within the DCOD. We've aligned the lot area to the single family lot area. So instead of the 15,000, it's 10,000. Again, the 15,000 seemed overly restrictive. We've reduced the frontage to also match the single family frontage, as the 120-foot requirement also seemed overly restrictive. We've applied a higher floor area ratio of 0.4, and we've reduced the side setback to match the single family side setback requirement of 10 feet as opposed to 20 feet. And again, the rationale here is we're targeting those neighborhoods that are most at risk, and we're trying to reduce the creation of any additional nonconformities within the DCOD area. The DCOD already has significant protections that come with it, those properties being in the DCOD. And finally, we're also streamlining the zoning by using those existing boundaries instead of trying to create a whole new set of overlay districts. And then height. Single family in the R2 outside the DCOD. So these are the areas that we were talking about, like out by 3 roads, behind the hospital, up Ward 1. We're going to limit those single family homes. Our proposal is to limit it to 25 feet. And for single family homes within the DCOD 30 feet, as Councilor Chalk said, those neighborhoods tend to have taller structures, older structures. 30 feet felt more appropriate than 25 feet in that area. But we keep the 2-family height in the R2 at 35 feet. So our hope is, again, this is part of trying to incentivize the creation of two-family homes within the R2 areas. And we can turn it over.
Just a couple more pieces, I promise we're almost done. Floor area ratio. So our proposal here is for single family homes in R2 outside the DCOD, the places that we are targeting, that is a 0.25 floor area ratio or 1850 square feet, whichever is greater. So there is a choice there that allows for a more reasonably sized home on even on a smaller lot. We also talked about limiting two-family homes in R2 outside the DCOD to a 0.40 FAR. So the rationale here, and I do want to walk through this because there is math, and I think this was a place that we had heard a lot of concern about what will this do to our ability to change a small house or add on a little bit or, you know, do anything on this property if it's such a teeny tiny house. So the idea here is by allowing up to 1850 square feet, regardless of the lot size, that's going to give flexibility for homeowners, for builders to expand to a reasonable size. 1850, we are proposing as sort of definitionally what we are talking about by a starter home. So even on a small lot, 3,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet, a 0.25 FAR would keep you down to a much smaller home, but 1850 is what you can do. We chose that amount not out of the clear blue sky, but because that is what the state of Massachusetts is defining as a starter home in its Chapter 40Y regulations. 1850 is the square footage there, so we thought it made sense to align with the state in what we are talking about when we are talking about a starter home. So when you consider a 10,000 square foot lot, that's what we say a conforming lot is in R2. That's the area. 0.25 floor area ratio nets at least a 2,500 square foot home. I say at least because we have excluded a bunch of stuff like the garage area and a detached ADU and all of the things that we have on our exclusion. So you might end up with a building that is greater than 2,500 square feet once you are including those things in the calculation or excluding those items from the calculation. 2,500 square foot home on a 10-foot lot. We did not arrive at 0.25 FAR randomly either. Digging into some of the data, we discovered that the median size of a new home sold in 2024, which is the Census Bureau's, like the US Census Bureau's sort of latest data on it, the average size or the median size of a new home, a brand new build, was about 2,200 square feet. So that is where our jumping off point is for what do we consider an average size home. By making it 0.25 FAR, we felt like we were giving some flexibility to go a little bit bigger and that number would not have unduly constrained builders and homeowners. That's where the number came from as the jumping off. So we have two numbers here. 0.25 on a 10,000 square foot lot is a 2,500 square foot home. If you cut that lot size in half and you have a 5,000 square foot lot with a much smaller lot, by FAR, that would mean a 1,250 square foot home, but you don't have to limit yourself to 1,250. You have this exemption to get up to 1,850. So that's just an illustration of how this works and how we were thinking about it as we received the feedback of, whoa, some of these lots are only going to support a very tiny house. Next slide. To continue this discussion of floor area ratio, I do want to point out our thinking about it in a two-family home. So we're proposing to allow a 0.40 floor area ratio for two-family homes. That is for the entire building. So you can build something that is on a 10,000 square foot lot up to 4,000 square feet, but you're cutting it in half and getting two 2,000 square foot homes out of that. So the reason for this is that allowing a larger floor area ratio for a two-family building gives us an alternative path to redevelopment. If you find that you cannot do what you want to do on this property, you cannot profitably redevelop a property at 0.25 FAR by building a single family home, perhaps you will find it more profitable to build a 0.4 FAR as a duplex. And this provides flexibility for homeowners to do different things with their property and for builders to realize the value of the property just in a different way. So we're not seeking to say, no, you can never do anything with this. We realize that is unfair, but we would like to offer an alternative about what you can do. And that alternative, we propose that alternative better aligns with the community needs, because the community needs, as we see it, is more housing, and specifically more naturally affordable housing of smaller size, because we need a diversity of options to meet the needs of various residents of Newburyport. I would also point out that the assessment on a two-family home at a 0.4 FAR is likely to be higher than one of a 0.25 FAR in a single-family home. So we find that this also balances the city's need for new growth in a fair way. And lastly, and I wanted to point out that the two-family FAR is limited to 0.4 instead of simply doubling 0.25 to be 0.5. We want to respect the scale and the feel of the neighborhood, so we're not just simply saying build a twice as big thing if you're making a duplex. 0.4 is keeping that a little bit more reasonably in scale with the existing units. Last slide, I promise. The two-family dimensional requirements. In R2 outside the D-cut, currently, two-family homes face more stringent lot requirements than single-family homes. And we are proposing to equalize the lot requirements for two-family homes. So the lot area, we are proposing to reduce the requirement from having a 15,000 square foot lot down to 10, just as you would be able to do by right for a single-family home. We are also proposing to reduce the street frontage from 120 down to 90, which matches what we propose, what is already in existence for a single family home. And finally, the side yard setbacks are different for two-family homes. We would like to reduce those from 20 as they are currently down to 10, which again matches what is required for a single family home. And those changes make building a two-family as possible as building a single family. And we believe that they still fit in the neighborhood and blend, because we have, if a giant single family home can fit there, then a mid-sized two-family home could fit there as well. And sort of discriminating against a two-family home is not helping anybody right now. So that's the rationale for that change. And so again, ending some of the disparities that make this option not feel possible to build right now. That sums up the changes, and Councilor Delay and I are absolutely ready to take some clarifying questions if we need to. We know it's complex. We know there is a lot here, and we're also looking forward to feedback. So thank you for the opportunity to really break it down. I hope it's clear.
So let's open it up to initial questions and discussion. You want to take that,
And Andy, we can't hear anything.
Sorry, just a
In the front here, but I can't even hear anything.
Thank you. Yeah, the chair.
Initial questions from planning board and city council prior to opening up to public comment.
Just a note on consistency of language would be helpful among these, which is like, discussion of starter, smaller, and I'm not sure that the two different amendments were consistent, so I think it would be helpful to a common definition of that, and certainly the smaller seems to make more sense. given the scope of the problem.
So I think I may have spoken about some of these things before, but I actually have 3.5 questions on that. Question one, you're exempting detached ADUs, but not attached ADUs, so you're in the policy is you're encouraging ADUs to be detached rather than attached. It seems like to me.
That the intent was not to encourage one or the other, but this was at the recommendation of the planning office. Because, and Jennifer, please feel free to jump in. The idea in the discussion was that it would functionally be very, very difficult to enforce an attached ADU because after it's built in the future, you could just knock down the wall in between them and have had a backdoor way to build a larger house. Am I summing that up correctly, the concern? So that was the impetus for specifically exempting a detached ADU because we felt that it was enforceable, but in a way that an attached one is not.
So the intent was to exempt ADUs, except that it was impractical.
Impractical to enforce
exempt.
the attached,
Okay.
yes.
I'm curious about retaining the 35-foot height limit for 2 families, say in the 3 rows area, because you
Yep.
might have 18-foot high single families, and then you're allowing a 35-foot 2-family next to it. And why would you not treat that the same way as a single?
Again, I think, our intent here is try to incentivize the construction. That's what exists presently, and if that's what a home builder, homeowner felt necessary to create a 2-family structure, we didn't want to limit them the height, by restricting it the same way. What exists now is 35. We felt if that's what it takes to encourage that, we should leave it.
Wouldn't the same argument apply to a single family? You know, and that's what I'm thinking, why not keep them the same?
I mean, we had discussed that height also, for the 2-family and being next to a single family. And I think Councilor Denai and I are definitely willing to talk about the height of the 2-family. It outside of the, yeah, we hear that piece of feedback about the disparity between them. So we can bring it down, maybe not to 25, but to 30 or something like that. Yeah, no, I agree what you're saying.
And then my 1.5 questions are about the 1,850 square feet limit. So one part of that is, and you probably talked about this with legal counsel, but since the state law prohibits setting a maximum on single family square footage, regulating single family interior square footage through zoning, FAR was an indirect way that was allowed to do that. But is it clear that you can do that? That's the first part of the question. Is it clear that you can do that as part of this exemption from the FAR limit? And then the other part of that is that a 1,850 square feet would be, if you were looking at a 25% floor area ratio, 1,850 square feet would translate to a 7,400 square foot lot. And so almost all of these places would be not pre-existing non-conforming in a way. So wouldn't you be able to use the special permit for non-conformities to get around that? And so I'm just wondering what the 1,850 is really necessary. Not opposed to it, just wonder A, whether it's legal, and B, whether it's necessary.
I think the legal aspect would take it did come up.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, if you want, get. Well, no, we can do that. I don't foresee any issues with that here in this context. I don't see that being an issue to apply that standard.
So what is the exemption from section 3 of 48? So how are you getting around that wording that says you can't regulate the?
Well, without going down the rabbit hole of an interpretation of case law and the statutes. Just saying, I don't think that is an issue here. I'm gonna have to call.
Just for additional background, we had also considered before landing on the number, the square footage number 1850 to simplify, it, we also considered kind of a sliding scale of FAR instead, like, oh, 10,000 and above, we'll do here, and then 5,000 to 10,000, we would have, worked on that number to sort of get at 1850 on the average, but this felt a lot easier to apply and to use and be clear for everybody. So that was our first preference. I suppose if we get a no from the city solicitor, we could go back to that sliding scale idea. The idea of exempting smaller lots and making that adjustment would not be off the table, even if we found out that we could not use this.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the down.
It just maybe not at all. You're starting from an FAR, right? And so then you have the possibility of something that's that. So in reality, you're already establishing a threshold allowed as a right, essentially. You're just essentially more akin to allowing something else beyond the baseline allowance in zoning by discretionary special permit. In this case, the city council will be opting to allow a higher threshold incentive, essentially. So the way I read that is it's not by that statute.
I would like that legal opinion.
Yeah. Understood.
I have a question. Are we allowed to ask questions? A point of clarification to your discussion.
Open it up for public comment.
Jennifer, if I can answer the second, as zoning administrator, answer the second part of Rick's question, if you're not going to, is it necessary? If one wants to allow that 1850 or that higher threshold that Andy just spoke to by right, it is necessary. Otherwise, the people would have to go through the special permit for nonconformities process, which you obviously point out is available. But I think the sponsors were trying to keep more of this process, by right, out of respect for homeowners and anyone building.
Any other questions?
Maybe comment. Very curious, this public comment, but I was looking at 218, subsection A. And as I read that, it just seems so arbitrary that if that came before us, we have to make, a judgment call on it. Especially impact aesthetics and overall neighborhood character. Can't imagine how long that conversation would go.
Amy, could you bring up the specific language? There are more specific. Pictures. Yeah.
See here on the bottom, right?
We'll dig into that.
Questions from counselors? Anyone on? I have a question on the rationale behind the change for R2 within the DCOT on height. Seems a little bit of an outlier in terms of purpose and goals of everything else.
Yes, so just to clarify, what you're pointing out is why did we still make a height change to R2 within the DCOG when that was the only change that we made?
Which was 35.
It was 35 to 30, so it was higher than what we had been proposing originally, but we had a lot of my word is within the DCOG, and I had heard from residents, many of them were still concerned about the height of buildings and like things going up. And they felt that, even within this neighborhood, that's sort of what happened. So we felt like that there was still a concern about height additions. And so we kept that. We are, flexible on it. I do realize it doesn't seem as clean to have just this one thing affecting the DCOG area. So the question is taken. That was the thinking behind it.
So, I think, an ordinance like this needs a lot of study. And I wonder if the sponsors have done an analysis of how many properties it will impact in the areas where it will apply. And how many of those properties will actually, it will impact not at all, because there are some very big properties in the R2 outside of the B5. And properties which you might have the opposite. Just some analysis of impact on the areas.
Could you, I want to make sure I understand the question. Do you mean like which properties are subject to it versus which ones are not conforming? Or I'm not sure I understand.
Well, right, that would be a place to start. How many lots conform now? How many lots are beyond conforming? So for example, it might be a half-acre lot. In the R2 outside of the D5, which would support very, whether it's a single family or
A half acre is 10,000 square feet.
No.
Well, yeah. Oh, sorry, that's half, yeah. And we had this conversation in the planning office. It was complex, and I know you had an initial sort of image for us on this, yes. This is a question for the zoning.
So if I could just clarify, maybe for the audience at least, Jennifer is our zoning administrator, so she is seeing the most frequently the types of applications that are coming in, comparing against compliant dimensionals and so forth, so. Something here.
I guess my initial answer to Councilor Nicotic's question is they're all affected. Because every single property, when you go to do a project on it, we have to evaluate this table. So when you ask me to do an analysis, or the counselors to do an analysis, I would not, if any of you brought me an analysis, I would say, well, that's nice. Now I have to do the same, because I don't know what numbers anyone's used when they include square footage. I look at everyone in this room, when they bring me numbers, I analyze those numbers and I look at them against our ordinance. So while I like the concept of studying it, it would be so cumbersome to do it. We can take a handful of them. We could take a selection of 20 in each neighborhood and try to do an analysis, but it really depends on what the proposal is. Is the person saying they want to do a 20 by 10 room off the back of their house? Well, then maybe this doesn't affect that property. But if they want to put 2.5 stories, then this ordinance affects it. So I don't quite know how to achieve the broad-based analysis that you're asking for. If you would like to see something a little narrower, maybe we can achieve it.
Well, we know what lot sizes are. We know what the lot sizes are, and we know what the square footage of existing buildings are. I mean, Newburyport is mostly built out. So that,
Well, so when you say we know what the square footage of existing buildings are, we know what the footprint is essentially from the assessor's records. If assessor's records are actually, they are a diagrammatic representation of what's on the ground. They are not a survey.
If I may just insert in there, we cannot rely upon the numbers that folks may thinking, or maybe thinking are in the assessor's database. That is not for the zoning administrative purposes or for implementing the zoning ordinance, the data that we can rely upon for that application.
So I do use them as tools. If a resident comes in and they say, I have a lot and it's 8,000 square feet. And we look at it, we can do a quick takeoff. We can say this lot has 70 feet of frontage approximately. And it looks like based on assessment records, you have about 1,200 square feet of footprint. So we do some basic analysis to say, this seems reasonable. It's probably worth going to get a survey and hiring a designer to see what you can do. But I don't,
I mean,
I can tell you, I can give you a ballpark, and to Council Trax, I did a diagram of, these are how many lots are conforming to area, and these are how many lots in these districts are conforming to frontage. But what we're talking about here isn't really relevant to whether your lot is conforming or not. This would apply to both conforming lots and non-conforming lots. So while I can provide that to all of you, I don't know that really impacts the conversation here a whole lot, because these rules apply non-conforming lots and conforming.
Right, and we'll still have non-conforming lots.
We will. So the ZBA will continue to see projects if setbacks are extended and all of that sort of thing. That all stays in place.
Well, I just want to follow up on a question, and then I see I'll let other people ask questions. You mentioned that zoning really doesn't use what's in the assessor's database, but every zoning application requires the assessor's record for the property. So that's confusing. I think I've seen it relied
It's a reference point,
on.
but we also require for anything with an expansion, we require a survey so that we know exactly where the property lines are relative to the structure and what the square footage is, what exists there. We didn't always do that, but we do at this point because we were running into some challenges.
And if I may, that actually maybe, and frankly, that's probably really an artifact of the
It
fact
is.
that prior to having more specificity in the zoning ordinance as to what calculates and what doesn't, and having frankly a zoning administrator spend the time in the detail, there was historically probably more reliance upon that trade number, but that number does not actually calculate mathematically directly to what the zoning ordinance requires for given uses or calculation. So we really do have to do an individual calculation if you want to get accuracy for something like that.
And I sort of to wrap up, we've gone beyond the answer, but it is for these reasons and the discrepancies perhaps between reality and the assessor's records that I asked at the Planning and Development Committee meeting that the counselors think long and hard about what is included and what's not included. And they did consult with us, and I think they've arrived at something that's pretty consistent with how we do things everywhere. Plum Island is its own animal, but everywhere else in these districts. And so I am far more comfortable with where we have arrived and would not rely upon the assessors.
Councilor Deline?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think we have the evidence that all properties would be impacted. As I look in the area in Ward 6, I can tell you that both conforming and non-conforming lots have both been areas where we have lost homes to mansionization. It doesn't matter whether they're conforming or non-conforming, it is still happening. You have houses on, for example, 2 houses on Brown Ave that are not conforming, and they both tripled in size on development. You have conforming lots where you have 6,000 plus square foot homes. So all of those properties, to Jennifer's point, are impacted. And I think the reason why, I mean, yes, I understand the point about study, but I think that we drew a lot of information from the work that had already been done some years ago on zoning. And a lot of people told us not necessary to redo that study. We have a lot of great information. And the other thing is there's a certain amount of urgency because over the last just several years, we have lost approximately 12 homes just in the Three Roads area to mansionization. So there's a certain amount of urgency for protecting these properties and essentially incentivizing different types of construction.
Question. Just to follow up on that discussion, and I think we talked about it earlier. I appreciate what you're saying, could we bound the impact is the way I would summarize it. We don't have to go lot by lot and do math and then try to imagine what someone would ask for, but we could take a sample, like a 10% sample and say, on a large lot, what would the impact be per ton? Smaller lot, what it would be, you can do one non-conforming, one conforming, but it would be helpful. We're going to create a formula. I always get concerned with the unintended consequence of that formula. And then you have to redo the formula, and for those that have been at it for a while, that's what ends up happening. You end up correcting and correcting and correcting, but you lose the impact somewhere along the way. So that would be the question. It wouldn't be the whole area, but just a random sample with some specificity to it to say, okay, that would be the result. That would be the allowed impact of that, would be a suggestion.
Councilman Medina Smith.
Yeah, I guess one comment on that, there was a suggestion in the planning and development meeting around looking at applications in queue as possibly a good sample set, especially given they're not subject to this, given the date of the posting, that might be a good analysis. And it's not overly like too many applications to go through. But I guess I wanted to make a second point that is tangential to go back to Ms. Blustein's comment around starter versus smaller home. When we looked at least in 218, a lot of what we're trying to do is address neighborhood context. So in my research, almost no one was referencing specific square footage. And I think that's intentional. So it might be worth, we could look at the options that I put together, but I'd love to hear from the planning board, the council, and from the public around kind of looking at those options and seeing what feels right. But the intention of those options around look at the neighborhood context and using that to draw.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you referring to the way we define starter homes in 218 specifically as using neighborhood context, or are you suggesting that in 221?
If we are addressing that comment around consistency, I think we should look at it and see whether or not it makes sense to have a common definition or we have different intentions.
Right, and we haven't defined.
Yes.
And if something like that is defined, it seems to me like if there is a consensus. That is something that should be in the definitions, not individual sections.
Yes, Councilor Khan.
Yeah, thank you. And I really do appreciate the sponsors, the edits that I see today. Definitely, I appreciate kind of trying to move to a place where something can be done, respecting that the different situations might vary. So I really do respect that. My one question is on the use of the FAR, ratio and other communities and their zoning. I know we do it in Plum Island, but that would be introducing a new metric to the rest of the city. And, things like that always, I think it goes down to the root of the analysis. When we're going to introduce that, what's the basis, what's the unintended consequences? And so I always want to make sure we're cautious before we move to maybe address, and I appreciated hearing the goals, preserve smaller homes, where we can, and encourage two family homes on the same lot instead. And I appreciate, us being very clear. That's what the intention here is. Hear the sponsor's intention. I will just add a comment on one of the examples is somebody who I do personally know their home and that family, and it became a generational home. So it wasn't necessarily like we always assume someone's selling and then it's becoming bigger, but there are specific situations on how families kind of evolve. So in terms of that unintended consequences and being able to understand when we do have lot sizes that are like the conversation on the zoning maps and looking at all the different lot sizes, an unintended consequence could be on those non-conforming lots. And so that analysis that Councilor Nikotich mentioned is actually of value. So I support the planning board member to welcome in their comment on that as well. That would be helpful.
Do you have a concern about a specific unintended consequence?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about neighborhood character, it's very broad. So in going into some neighborhoods where the lots are very big, but you're able to go to like 25%, let's say, it would not maybe be what other homes have. So we're assuming that everything is of the same uniform look, and one thing can make it look not in character. So without kind of having an idea of the different lots, like I could see in the South End, it's really clear how stands fit together. But outside of that area, I'm not exactly too familiar. So that's more my observation on that. So, and I actually really do think unintended consequences won't come so much from me as those guys out there. Because I'm not a developer, I'm not an architect, and I look forward to hearing the comments.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the question.
May I speak to Councilor Khan's? to some of those smaller lots that may already be non-conforming for FAR, they still would be available to the special permit for nonconformities process. So this,
An extension of the non-conformity?
so the special permit for nonconformities process allows for when there is a nonconforming dimensional control, which if you are already over at 26% FAR, and you wanted to add a room off the back for your mother-in-law or whatever, you know, you spoke to a multi-generational situation, you could still come in through that special permit for nonconformities process. And they would still have to evaluate all the things that they evaluate, that they, planning board or ZBA, depending on where you are, through that process. So this does not negate the
So it doesn't
protections.
stop
No,
a
it does.
It just means that
There might be an additional review
It's-
process.
Yeah, so
It might be another. It might trigger the zoning that is related to that.
Not sure. Maybe it's not sure.
You can just on comments.
The problem is when stuff not being accurately said, it's not helpful.
Waiting comments.
I get it.
While we're having Texas. Thank you very much. Well, let's open it up on comment then. We're going to take this in the groups that you have signed up for. Once again, there's a lot of names here. We're trying to limit this to 2 minutes.
Before we start, just for anybody online who wants to make public comment, we'll come up to you after the. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll take those.
Councilor Harmon will be keeping track of time and we'll let you know when we've hit maybe 2 minutes. So first speaker, Tom Colton.
I'm Holden John, 64 Federal Street. On number 220, I strongly support this one. It's a no-brainer. It solves an unintended problem, making it clear that both the contributing and minor contributing buildings in the DOD should be reviewed by the Historic Commission and planning. It'd be a shame to leave something like, whatever it is, 20 buildings downtown left to possible demolition. We all thought downtown was pretty well safe, but so on number 218, I support this one also. It clarifies what the ZBA already seems to try to do, and that's protect neighborhood character. And number 221, I look forward to further work on this one to see if it can actually work to accomplish its goal. Its goal is admirable, but I think it needs a lot more work.
Thank you.
Chris Sawtell.
Chris Sawtell, 29 Summer Street, Newburyport. I'm also vice chair of the Newburyport Historical Commission. This is a comment towards 220. This ordinance change will add the much needed clarity required for the decisions and determinations of the Newburyport Historical Commission in continuation of the preservation of Newburyport's historic assets, as well as a vital historical resource for the residents of the city. I believe this will bring the district data sheets a solid step closer to its much needed update. I certainly appreciate all the hard work done in 1984 and now today on this very important task. Historic buildings in Newburyport, thank you as well.
Thank you.
Jim Highcourt.
Jim Icorse, 13 Hart Road, and I want to talk about 221. I support 221, but I think we need to make it a little bit stronger for larger lots. On Hart Road, we have three 17,000 square foot lots. On one of the lots, it was just the house that was sold, 700,000, is a 900 square foot footprint house. It's going to be torn down, and they are going to put up 2,500 plus square foot footprint house. Go up 2,500 square feet. So you're going to have over 5,000 square feet of living space on this road. And that will tower over every other house on our road. There is no affordable housing in Newbury. Average assessment is over $1 million. You need $1 million to move into Newburyport. Something to consider that. Okay? Not many people have $1 million in the bank account when they're 25 to 35 years old to move into Newbury. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lila Wright.
You're right, 55 Reservation Terrace. I am again speaking tonight as a concerned resident, a local realtor of 30+ years, and a former ZBA member. I'm speaking on behalf of the public, the residents, friends, clients, former clients, neighbors, and the greater Newburyport real estate community, many of which may not be aware of how this proposal will impact them, whether financially when they want to sell, or the inability to expand their home to accommodate their growing family. I'm greatly concerned for the unintended consequences we will see with respect to Ordinance 221, specifically imposing a floor area ratio. Across this wide and sweeping area within the R2 district, we have approximately 300 years of architecture, a wide variety of housing stock. We truly have a little bit of everything. We have some exceptionally large structures along High Street, once referred to as mansions. We have more of these large federal and colonial style structures along many side streets within the R2 district as well. And then in between them, we find some smaller structures, maybe some mid-sized structures, a few multifamily structures, and occasional commercial structures, such as a hospital, or maybe a school. We also have our downtown business district right in the middle of this area. The only thing I can assure you of is seldom are these structures the same size or the same height. And this actually creates the character and charm of this old seaport community. The Newburyport I remember as a child was vastly different. The downtown, as we know it today, was more like a ghost town with boarded up buildings and broken windows. The waterfront was anything but a park. It was smelly, dirty, it was a working waterfront, and it was sketchy. We have come a long way in Newburyport, in part due to the creative and talented developers who each lend their own unique style and design to their projects. I had the luxury of growing up in this business. I not only followed in my father's footsteps, I carried the bricks out of the basements and from the tumbled chimneys. I stripped the peeling paint from the antique moldings. I was knocking down walls by the time I was 12. I listened and I learned. And to suggest we should be more concerned with the size and height of the neighborhood home over the individual property rights of its owner under the guise of affordability is simply wrong and unfair.
Thank you.
One last sentence. For the record, the FAR used on Plum Island was put in place as a condition in order to bring clean water and fire protection to the residents. It was not an easy or rushed zoning amendment. It came at a cost, but for the greater good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Zamboni.
I moved to Newburyport in 1992. I fell in love. And the enclave, mansion after mansion after mansion. I moved here. I raised two daughters. I've owned and sold 4 houses here. And I work with hundreds of buyers and sellers of real estate. This 1,850 square foot max and ratio 25 square feet is wrong. It sounds technical, but in real life, it's a ceiling on how far many families are allowed to go on making their homes truly work. On a typical Newburyport lot, that square foot maximum is not stopping a mansion, it's stopping a 3-bedroom home from ever becoming a 4-bedroom, or a 1-bath from becoming a 2-bath. It tells a young couple who's reasonably planned to add a bedroom when they have a second child that they may have already made their house as big as it's ever going to be. It tells an adult child trying to bring an elderly parent into the home that there may be no way to add a small floor on the first bedroom and a bath. It tells someone trying to age in place or work from home that their extra few hundred square feet that would make staying here possible are now off limits. And when you do that, you aren't just freezing a building, you're shrinking a future. Many longtime residents and retirees on fixed incomes, this house is their retirement plan. They raised kids here, they paid taxes, they built our schools and parks, and believe that if they took care of their home, it would take care of them later. The strict maximum weakens that promise. If a buyer or builder can no longer reasonably expand and modernize within those limits, the market value of that property will be lower than it otherwise would be. You're telling those owners after 30 or 40 years of doing everything right that their nest egg that they built is now worth less because the city has decided that their home must stay exactly as it is. Think about the human terms. You skip vacations, you keep the old car, you help your kids get through school and pay their tuition, you trust that your home is your anchor. Then you're told you can't add that small bedroom that would let you stay there as your health changes, or sell to somebody who wants to invest and gently grow the home for their family. Your options narrow, not because you're irresponsible, because the rules moved under your feet. This is not just about square footage, just last sentence. It's about whether or not Newburyport keeps the faith with its own residents. For retirees counting on their home, families trying to grow, and the neighbors who hope to age in place with dignity, I urge you to vote no on 220.
Thank you.
Please, the meeting.
Thank you, members of the council and the planning board. I want to address an overarching issue related to the notice. We saw a lot of sausage here tonight. I haven't even seen these changes. These are significant changes to the proposal to 221 and 218. They need to be re-advertised, and the people of the city of Newburyport need to see what's being considered. That's what PA Section 5 requires, 14-day notice period, so people have an opportunity to see what's being put in front of the city council for consideration in the planning board. And I urge you to do that. These kinds of discussions should happen before zoning changes are made. Part of the process is to bring people in because there are unintended consequences when you go forward without those kinds of considerations. As an example of potentially unintended consequences, I suggest that you remember the council and the planning board's change in 2017 of shrinking the R3 district from once that spread all the way from the downtown to Ashland Street to the west and to Marble Street to the east. It now goes to Winter Street and it goes to Federal Street. And the rest is the R2. And in 2004, all 2 families and 3 families or multifamilies were put on special permit. So you're not going to be able to build 2 families by right. The 2 families are on special permit. They're still going to be required to go get a special permit for use from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So you haven't made it any easier. And what has happened, you are now trying to undo the suggestion that we should do all single families because you made those changes before. Those are unintended consequences that now, as you look back on, the reason people are suggesting or promoted to go to single family homes is because it's difficult to create 2-family homes, not just by dimension, but also by use. As to the suggestion of changes in 218, I respectfully disagree with what the Bjorklund case says and what you added to the zoning ordinance. The Bjorklund case was a case to decide that if you had a pre-existing non-conforming lot, but a dimensionally conforming house, was that going to be non-conforming, and were you expanding the non-conformity of the lot, and could you still subject it to the substantially more detrimental standard? And the answer is yes, you could still subject it to the substantially more detrimental standard. They did not just say you would consider aesthetics, they defined aesthetics. In Bjorklund, they said aesthetics were related to height, scale, massing, and similar items as listed in the then Newburyport bylaw.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear the rest of the Jamie has to say out to speed, but 2 minutes. And Newburyport resident to
Thank you. In the Norwell bylaw. In fact, it then defined it as being those specific findings. So it defined aesthetics. It didn't just say aesthetics. And the entire quote that they used is that when you apply these aesthetics, the zoning board of appeals could then look at the potential of the expansion of smaller houses into significantly larger ones, decreasing the availability of then would-be starter homes in the community. And that was a fair consideration, but it defined aesthetics. And similarly, if you look down in the next section related to the Britton case, the Britton case also defined aesthetics. It said volume, height, size, location on a lot as to the adjacent structures and lots using all in relation to light, air, and the genre of the neighborhood. It defined aesthetics. The reason the second part, and we already define aesthetics in the zoning ordinance. We don't need to add it again. It's defined. We use those exact same findings in the existing zoning ordinance. I want to also be clear. What the second section of 218 is asking the board to do is to take into consideration if a person wants to convert a 2 or 3 family into a single, that they should look askance at that. But that flies in the face of Chapter 48, Section 6, and also the pre-existing non-conforming section of the zoning ordinance, where you are supposed to move non-conforming structures and uses into conforming structures and uses. So you can't ask the zoning board to tell a person they can't go to a single family, which is allowed by right, from a 2 family or a 3 family, which is only allowed by special. So I'm going to stop because I've taken up my time. I've given everybody a document. I have great concerns about 221 and 218. The change with regard to the DOD and the contributory is fine, but you've got to you have to withdraw these, re-advertise them so everybody knows exactly what's happening, and you can have a fair discussion of this and understand the impacts. Thank you.
Jeff Caswell.
Oh, Lisa. You know, the notice and stuff like that. I was gonna talk about the unforeseen consequences too, which I'm sure you're gonna hit. So, I was gonna talk about my friend over here that wants to put an addition on her house that she wants to put as kids and stuff like that. She's already with FAR. She can't do it. You know, people that want to move on houses, they can't do it. I'm gonna totally table that. It's more the unforeseen consequences. I mean, tax and stuff like that. Everyone knows about they took the R3 out. I'm talking about something completely different. Here's what you say, okay? That became a problem because when Black Cow went in, they used to buy right here, have a restaurant with parking. So when that was going on, everyone went, knee-jerk reaction, let's start to move. So then they say, you have to park in space. This is what you say, they want to do office space. By right, they had to put parking in. That's a parking lot. That became a lawsuit because they fought with the city. I was like, it's huge. It's huge because you took away the parking. That was close to the city because you wanted to fix one problem because someone got mad. So that's the unforeseen consequence that you got to say. People also build equity in those. They borrow against it. They put their kids to school. They do all kinds of stuff that you don't know about. And it's not just tearing down houses. Everyone's like, let's stop the guys from tearing down the houses. That's not the case. You're trying to fix 1 or 2 problems with this. It's just the wrong way to go. And the notification is, I mean, I've been following this. I just got these today, just putting something out. It's asking. You gotta talk to the town, you gotta talk to the city. People don't even know what's going on. Because I follow the city stuff. Everybody talking, they have no idea. You're taking it right. I'm not going on my 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Giselle, Tom?
How hear you?
The friend that was talking about. My name is Giselle Tache, and I live at 15 Carlton Drive, Ward 5. I initially came here to speak about how this proposal would impact my ability to make improvements to my house. Specifically, that I may not even be able to add something simple as a bathroom. I understand that some updates have been made since then, but I still have some serious concerns. My biggest concern is how this information is being communicated to residents. I only became aware of this proposal because my architect mentioned it to me while I was preparing for a project. And had that not happened, I had no idea. After learning about it, I spoke with several of my neighbors on my street, and none of them were aware of this proposal either. Not even one person I spoke not even one person I spoke to had any knowledge that something like that was being considered. For something that significantly impact homeowners and their ability to improve their property, it's concerning that there doesn't seem to be clear or widespread communication. Many residents may be completely unaware of changes that could directly affect them. I respectfully ask that more effort be made to ensure transparency and that residents are properly informed before decisions like this move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Dunderin.
John Danderant, 94 Ferry Road. Mansionization kept being mentioned tonight, and that word appears it's being used to create panic among the residents here. I mean, no mansions are being built. The mansion is 8,000 square feet plus, if you look up the definition. The houses that are being built that they're talking about are 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, which are single-family homes. A family of 5 does not want to live in 1,850 square feet. I know, I'm doing it right now. Architectural quality was also mentioned, is preserving that. These 1950s post-war homes are not of substantial architectural quality. I mean, some of them are very well kept. They're not efficient, they're not insulated properly. Should they be torn down? Not all of them, no. But I mean, architectural quality, some of it's not there sometimes. Again, as other people mentioned, there was no notification of this, and some of the information wasn't even accurate until tonight. And some of the information the sponsors mentioned tonight, out of their mouths to this crowd, wasn't accurate as it was being said. I'm against all of these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christopher, did you want? Yeah. John Spillman.
I'm John Spellman. I live at 200 Water Street. And there was some confusion in my mind about what exactly was covered in the south end. And I guess it is covered because it used to be part of R3, but now it's all R2. And I'm talking about High Street to Water Street, roughly over to Marlboro and Beacon. So it looks like that's in, but then I see part of it's carved out. So could you please, perhaps as a point of information, just go over that? What is in and what is out in R2?
We can revisit it when you're done.
Sure. Okay. And my general comment is, I found this to be far too overbroad and burdensome to existing residents, going from 35 feet to 25 feet. How many houses in the south end are over 25 feet? I would say the vast majority. And these tremendously complicated neighborhoods, block by block, built over 300 years, some big, some small. A lot sizes, 10,000 square feet. Where do you find a 10,000 square foot lot in Joppa? They're all teeny tiny lots, and this would impose tremendous burdens on existing homeowners who, as previous speakers have noted, want to simply make their homes more comfortable and more livable for their families, and subject them to an expensive, protracted permit process with very uncertain results.
Thank you.
Ron Growitz.
I'll keep it under 2, I promise that.
Give you a buck.
So I didn't prepare anything because I just want to spend a lot of time talking to you guys. I appreciate what's trying to be done. However, I think that we're a bit misguided in our calculation. So we're using 1850 as our square foot. We just came up with that recently, and that may move, it may not. I think my main problems with all this stuff, I know you're listening to public opinion and you're trying to get feedback and alter. the main concern is the public doesn't know about it, right? And those unintended consequences, we had Giselle just speak about, I didn't know this was happening. I'm going through planning with my architect. I had no idea that this was going on. When you're making sweeping changes like this, and we don't really have the data to identify which houses are going to be affected, all those people need to be notified. You need to hear from them before you implement any sort of process that's going to limit their value or the potential for them to stay in their home. Using that 1850 square footage method. Since 2022, houses that have gone to market, there's been over 221 sales, from 900 square feet to 1850. Just browsing those, of those houses, how many of them were developed? I was counting under 20 that became something significantly bigger, more substantial. I'd also make the argument that a starter home, it doesn't exist in Newburyport. And there's no zoning we're going to propose that's going to make Newburyport affordable or starter home. What we do have is a bunch of condominiums. And 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom condominiums, the market for those is ample. And I would make the case that a lot of those people then buy these single family homes, and then it creates supply. A lot of people building these big homes aren't from out of market. They're Newburyport people who sell another house that then opens up supply. We have to look at this from a much broader spectrum than FAR or any other zoning proposals right now. And one thing that is very clear, based on just the conversations people are having here, there isn't enough information for anyone to make an informed decision. That's all.
Thank you.
Andrew Sidford.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Sidford. I live here in town. I'm a registered architect. I've been practicing all New England for about 40 years. Designed pretty much every kind of house you can imagine, small, large, everything in between. I think there are no experts in aesthetics, but I have a lot of experience with that. And I'm very upset about two things that I think are unintended consequences, and maybe not. But when you bring up aesthetics, I think the original definition was the one that is now being changed into design control. And then you bring up what used to be now where no less detrimental for the neighborhood to fitting in with the neighborhood. We have now gone down, we're going down a very slippery slope of design review by committee. And I think, I've got to say, after all these years, we've won awards for historic projects for design. Many of our projects that would not have passed muster of a design by committee. And so I just cannot say it strong enough that this is down the road towards a gated community where everything has to feel homogenous by a group. I think this is an infringement of rights, and I think it's contrary to what we love about this town. I don't like all the new houses, and I'm very appreciative of all the historic houses that have been saved, but I think this is overreaching and unnecessary. I just bought, for 4 years, I just bought that starter home you think you're talking about. It's 1,000 square feet. It's in the south end. I'm on a 3,000 square foot lot. It's about what I could afford. And I just found I already have to have an excellent attorney, very cheap. I already have to get a certified plot plan. I have to get a wetlands expert. I have to go to Concom. I have to go to historic. I have to go to zoning. And I just found out that the DEP decided that, I'm going to raise the floodplain. So if I spend more than $120,000 in a house that's barely livable, it's just an Airbnb, I have to tear it down and start over and put it at 4 feet above grade. So I don't understand why we have to go further. That's already here. I already have to go through all of this. And now if you're saying it's 25 feet, when I have to raise the first floor to 4 feet, and I've got not much left. I think the height is incredibly important. Everything around me is 35 feet. And the fact that you got in zoning that it talks about the midpoint roof is the part that's most critical in keeping some of these profiles. So I think this really needs to be thought through. And I think the affordability of a 2-family house of 2,000 square feet is not going to happen. I think the ADU law has been very powerful. We have designed a number of them that create rental properties, and I think that's the direction. So
Thank you for your time.
Jay Kessler.
See you up here. How you doing, Jay Caswell? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to, speaking to 221. At the end of the day, I'm trying to get my mind around what this new zoning ordinance is trying to achieve. So you say you want to save naturally occurring starter homes. I don't know what that means. But, you know, the way I look at it is you want to classify these starter homes as, you know, you're a starter home, you want to allow to go so much larger. What if the young family was in there? You're saying they need to leave there and go find a new home, because it's so big. So then I consider that kind of classing that. You're basically saying, we're gonna determine that this house in perpetuity, no upward mobility, and you can only work that much because if you grow and want to stay here, you need to leave because the family needs to go in here and can't find a home, go somewhere else. So I don't think that's very good. I also don't think it solves any affordability issue. Any affordability issue, you have to build more housing to outpace demand. So if it was as simple as restricting existing housing stock, to solve the problem, well, Massachusetts would. Yes, you guys just solved the biggest problem. That wasn't solved. So it makes you get to the point of what is the issue here? What, when you dig in the details of what does this really mean? These ordinances, when you look into them, what they really mean, to me, as you look at them, if you can actually read what it is, it reeks of people are upset, people are doing on their property. So if someone has the right to do something with their property, when they bought it, they went in there. When you go to buy something, you look, I can do this, maybe I can do that. I can grow into this one. So people go in there and they make big financial decisions on certainty, not uncertainty, certainty. So what it is when you're looking at these things, people go on and I'm going to expand it to what I'm allowed to do by R2 zoning, and they build what they want to. They might have 5 kids, you know what? They might just want a gym and what? It's not, you know, what you want. But they build it within what they're allowed to. It almost seems to me that it's a group of people who just don't like that they did that, so let's just come up with some type of ordinance that will restrict it, and it's like citywide sweeping, and it's kind of, it's really concerning. You go down this road. So it's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Wright.
Mark Wright, 55 Reservation Terrace, former city councillor. Most of my time was spent on budget and finance. You've heard from the people who have their fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. You've heard from developers, you've heard from real estate agents who really understand what the market is. Changing the zoning isn't going to change what people are willing to pay for properties. And so what's going to happen is that the developers who can't make any money under these constraints, or the people who live in these houses and can't get building permits to expand them, are going to have to leave and go somewhere else. The effect that's going to have, the unintended consequence on our budget is going to be enormous. Budget is dependent on 2.5% for the override increase per year, plus building permits and new growth. I see this having a significant impact on both of them, building permits and new growth. And if you're following the budget process right now, the schools have come in with a request for a 4.3% increase to the school budget. That essentially takes up all of Proposition 2.5. So the rest of the city has to rely on building permits and new growth to do what they have to do in the city. So I understand the motivations of these ordinances, of these zoning changes, but I think you have to take into very serious consideration the unintended consequences that this is going to have on the financing and the finances of the city of Newburyport for many years to come. Thank you.
Ken Swanton?
Hi, my name is Ken Swanton. I live at 10 Tremont Street. I'm also, for the last 6 years, I've been a member of the zoning board of appeals. So I've been dealing with a lot of these issues that you folks are looking at tonight. I can resonate with some of the comments that have been said here. In 2 minutes, I'm just going to touch on one and then focus on one of the others. The first one on minor contributing versus contributing. We spent an hour upstairs in this building last night and was looking at that. And we hope you clear it up and have those 19 buildings that look down as minor contributing, because I believe what happened is that it was always intended to be that way. It's up to you to figure it out. I don't see a huge amount of opposition to that. The last one you have up there on mansionization, this is something we have dealt a lot with recently. We've had several very large hearings that have gone week after week. A couple of houses on Erie, a house on Harding. A lot of neighbors came in. There's a street of small homes, and somebody wanted to knock one down and put a very big home up. My advice to you is height is huge. I do think going to 25 feet makes a lot of sense. All of the ones we approve are under 25 feet. One of them took three inches to get under 20. But a very tall building looming over the neighborhood is one of the biggest things to affect the neighborhood. On FAR, I've had experience with it on Plum Island, and I think it has been effective there and not overbuilding that barrier beach. I know other cities use it on the mainland, if you will, and I think it's good to look at, but I would be careful and move slowly. I agree it's a bit of a moving train. This afternoon, I looked to see all the changes before this meeting. I think you should slow it down. And I did some analysis myself. It was brought up of, how would this thing pan out? Well, I looked at those two houses on Erie and the one on Harding that we spent weeks on. If this thing was in place, what would have been different? Well, all three of them were under a FAR of 0.25. All three of them wound up over 0.25. And some of them were much bigger, but we worked them down, but they wound up 0.28, 0.33, and 0.42. Some of those lots are quite small. So I would encourage you to look at other places. We had one on Beacon that was a huge outcry that would be affected here. I would encourage you to go back and look at the big ones in the last 3 or 4 years and see how this would affect it. The other thing I would encourage you to do is look what other cities do. We're not the only ones who thought about having a FAR on the mainland. I would go look. Does it work? What are the problems you're into? And in general, I would slow it down. I wouldn't stop. I think it's got a lot of potential, but it needs some work. That's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen Graham?
Good evening, Eileen Graham, 439 Merrimack. I am also a design professional in town here. I've been in Newburyport for 30 years. I've had my own architect practice for about 27, 28. And I'm here to speak specifically, while I do think there are some valid proposals here, I think there's still a long way to go. But specifically, I want to, actually, I'm going to go off videos and so on, just to add to the building height comment. I actually did a little study, probably I have about 20 here. In general, I think that going down to 25 is really restrictive. I would see 30 comfortably. In everything that the work I do, there was probably only in the 20, probably only one that was 34.1. Everything else was under 30. And so I feel like while it's really hard to get to the 25 sometimes. If you are on a property that has a good amount of grade change, that 25 can be really challenging. So I feel like the unintended consequence on that is a compromise on the design. The form actually can suffer and the look of the building, and I don't think that that is, most of the design professionals are being conscientious of the building height. And in fact, I'll actually speak to Lincoln Street as well, as I was the architect on the project, and I would like to accurately put on record that building is 26.2 in feet. All right. So again, under 30, you know, the idea, and keep in mind, I think people think buildings are higher due to a ridge height, but that building met zoning requirements. That building met all zoning requirements. Anyway, just a quick comment since I was talking about building height. Really, I feel strongly about the unintended consequence as it relates to FAR. What I want to speak to is actually I want to protect my clients who are in the small properties. What I mean by that is, yes, there are, as spoken earlier, there is the potential to defend, or excuse me, to request and ask for a special order for the non-conforming properties that might trigger the FAR matrix. But it's the ones that actually don't need it. So my properties, my projects that come in at 24.7, and they have no room to grow. Again, meeting all the descriptions that everybody's saying, it might be that young family that they grow up from the space, the couple that's been here for 30 years, and now they are empty nesting and need to plan for aging in place. They can't add, they're dead in the water. So they have 0.3% to add. And so those are the properties that I think will really suffer from that. I have a project in specific, 2 Grant Garden, corner of Garden and, sorry, I'm blank tonight. Thank you. And that is a simple cape, and they have detached 1-car garage, and our proposal was to join the 2 simply, and we wanted that. And the existing house was 1,600 square feet. Again, 24.7 it comes in at. And if this applied, thank God they had permitted already a few months back, but if this had applied to them, they have no room to grow. And we ended up with, it went to zoning, we ended up with a property that continues that Cape form, that is supporting exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for these type of houses. And that's exactly what we provided. So those are the properties that we. Thank you. Thank you.
Blake Wilcox?
Wilcox and Heritage Street, or job group and TDG construction. Only have 10 minutes to speak up here. So, back of 23 Lincoln was project. I want to say we had resounding neighborhood support. So, I mean, 106%. You go and knock on the doors and not everybody there. They'll get feedback today from the neighbors about how much that. I know the objective of the Starter Home Initiative in the 25% on an attempt to protect starter homes. I just want to talk about the approach. I want to think the approach is not data driven, the desired objective not met. The more serious impact will be to the thousands that live in the impacted R2 zone. I start the count, mind map with this new overlay and start the count. I want to reasonably expand. I'd like to see the starter home provision be kicked back into committee, the committee to engage builders and architects more data-driven. The problem will not be solved with a few amendments to the zoning. Rather, this is a long-term, multi-year, intentional approach towards the goal. I know I would be willing, as I expect in this room participate in this process to achieve this common goal. I think with a quick story that just happened days ago, the unintended consequences of FAR implementation. While I do buy and renovate properties in Newburyport, the majority of my work is for the residents of this town. We renovate and do additions to their homes. As of a couple days ago, I met with a family who's growing. They bought their home several years ago. They've seen nice appreciation in the value. And they love their neighborhood and they want to do an addition. Addition to be bought right. It's far less costly and far faster. In the new proposal, they will need a variance, which they will not get. My question would be, does this change that will impact thousands of residents, thousands of people, the impact of this is worth it? Yeah.
Thank you.
Heather Rogers.
My name is Heather Rogers. I live at 23 North Atkinson Street. I'm a realtor in town, and probably 70% of my work is new construction. I'm also a past planning board member. And what I'd like to say is that I admire your dedication and the time you spent. The same with city council. I think it's a collaborative effort that you need trust from the community and you need to be respectful to the community. And trust was violated with me. And I would like to clarify the record, and I'd like my words to be properly dictated so that everybody could hear my words and not what was manipulated. Last fall, I attended a meeting on the second floor of this building, which was hosted by Councilwoman Delay. I listened to the meeting, and then I rose my hand, and I announced who I was, and I wanted to share some insight. I said that I represent builders in town. I said that there's guys in town that are builders that I don't work with, but I have the same feelings about them. They're respectful men, they're family members of this community, they're raising children, and they have careers. I said that they were respectful to all of the zoning ordinances. I also suggested that a meeting, a sit-down meeting be had, where you would invite them to the table and have discussions with them. That did not happen. I said they're collaborative. I said that if you sit down with them, they'll share insight and they'll listen to you, and together you could really form a nice zoning plan. That didn't happen. Context, my words, when I said they do follow zoning, I then said if the rules change, they will follow it. That's manipulation when that last sentence is the only sentence that was on record. So please put all of the words on record because they are respectful human beings and they deserve to collaborate with you. Thank you.
George Hazen.
George Hazeltine, 67 High Street. I'm also the owner of the shop. Thank you for members of the planning board and the city council subcommittee members that I truly believe have been working very hard to create meaningful change. And also thank you to members of the planning office who have really put great effort to try and help in any way possible. And Swanton, members of the ZBA for being here as well. I support 220. Generally speaking, I think that's clearly something we need to clarify. I would ask the city council zoning subcommittee take a step back, however, regarding 221 and look at the full picture and more importantly, the unintended consequences of what's being proposed. I understand the concern. Nobody wants to see projects that feel out of scale or out of character. What we're seeing is a layering of new hurdles and expanded authority over property rights without a clear, holistic framework and full stakeholder involvement up front. And that's where the risk lies. When rules are built incrementally in response to a few acute examples, they often end up impacting a much broader set of reasonable, well-designed projects. Projects that would otherwise fit the neighborhood, contribute to the housing stock, adding more supply, and might I add, less cost because of more supply, and move through the process responsibly. I would challenge the council to take a more comprehensive approach, bring all stakeholders to the table early, residents, builders, architects, and board members, and work towards clear objective standards that reflect the intent of each neighborhood. We find ourselves, however, right now in a very difficult position. The current volume of amendments has moved beyond refinement and into the realm of confusion. Many of these changes appear to be reactive course corrections made by councilors who may not have fully grasped the technical mechanics of the original proposals. By trying to fix specific grievances on the fly, the committee is inadvertently creating a Frankenstein code, a collection of parts that don't work together as a cohesive whole. Minimally, it is extremely confusing to us folks who have a rather decent understanding of zoning, never mind the average Newburyport citizen who likely has little clue to how these amendments may affect them and the future value and rights of their property. On top of that, the vast majority of residents don't even know any of this is happening, which in my opinion makes the path the council is following borderline dereliction of duty. Quite frankly, how this process has moved along has shaken my faith in the way we approach legislative governance. Given the depth of additional study required to understand the impacts of our residents, as well as the acute budgetary consequences of these goals, I strongly recommend this subcommittee withdraw the current proposals. This is not a call to abandon progress. It is a recommendation to hit the reset button and open a broader, more transparent conversation. We need to create a truly equitable plan that addresses the specific, rather infrequent problems allowed under our existing zoning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy N.
I'm good. You already heard everything.
Rachel Person. No.
My name is Rachel Person Candelora. I actually am not a resident of Newburyport, but I am a real estate agent in town, and I was born and raised here. I now live in West Newbury because, like many others, I have been priced down to the community that I grew up in. I am not only a realtor, I am an affordable housing advocate, and I am the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee at the YWCA of Greater Newburyport. This issue is deeply personal to me, but it is also something I deal with professionally every single day. I work with buyers who want to stay here and cannot. I talk to families who are competing for a shrinking number of modest homes. I see firsthand how difficult it has become for working people, young families, and long-term residents to find something they can realistically afford. I also want to state clearly that I understand the frustration driving these proposals. I feel it too. It is heartbreaking to watch smaller, more modest homes get purchased, torn down, and expanded beyond recognition or turned into something completely unobtainable for the local buyer. I care deeply about preservation. I love older homes. I live in what I like to call my mid-century modest ranch, and seeing homes with character disappear is genuinely sad to me. But caring about the problem and choosing the right solution are not always the same. My concern is that we are aiming at a real problem, but in some cases using tools that may not achieve or solve it. With respect to 221, I actually think parts of this ordinance are a step in the right direction. I support the idea of loosening dimensional requirements for two-family homes. Reducing frontage, lot area, and certain setback requirements makes sense if the goal is to allow more housing variety and create alternatives to oversized single-family homes on a lot. That part, in theory, is smart. But I think the ordinance falls short in a major way. If two-family homes are not allowed by right, loosening dimensional controls alone does not really solve the problem. It may make them easier to draw on paper, but it does not necessarily make them easier to build in practice. If the approval pathway is still uncertain, discretionary, expensive, and slow, then we have not actually changed the underlying barrier. We have just slightly adjusted the math, and that is not enough if the stated goal is to create more obtainable housing. I do not think capping single-family homes through tighter height limits and FAR controls is going to meaningfully improve affordability. Limiting the size of a home does not lower the cost of the land. It does not lower the cost of construction. It does not suddenly make Newburyport inexpensive. In my opinion, a 25-foot height limit is probably too tight and risks creating new problems. If the concern is scale, then maybe there is a more balanced way to approach this. If the actual goal is to preserve starter homes and create more obtainable housing, then we need to focus much more on feasibility and supply. We should be talking about smaller lot sizes for single-family homes. We should be talking about allowing one conforming lot to become two or more modest-sized homes where appropriate. We should be talking about making it possible for a builder to create several small homes instead of one very expensive one. This is how you change the economics. Can I finish? I'm almost. This is the kind of, wait, sorry, I lost my place. That is how you give builders an incentive to produce homes that are actually smaller and relatively more attainable. Simply restricting what can be built without meaningfully expanding what is allowed by right is not enough. And if we want an example of what progressive housing policy actually looks like, we do not have to look very far. Hampton, New Hampshire recently passed zoning for cottage court style homes. This is the kind of conversation we should be having. How to create more small homes, more diverse housing types, and better pathways to build them. That is far more productive direction than simply layering on restrictions and hoping that the market somehow produces affordability anyway. I appreciate the intent behind the proposal, and I agree that Newburyport needs to address the loss of smaller homes and the pressure of mansionization. But I do not believe more subjective, more discretionary review, and more delay and more red tape are the answer. If we truly care about affordability, then we need policies that increase housing variety, reduce barriers, simplify approvals, and make it financially possible to build modest homes. We should be creating better pathways, not more restrictions. Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak who has not signed in?
I'd just like to know where this information is available so we can look at it later.
Like to come up?
I can just speak to that briefly if you'd like. So on the city's website, if you look at tonight's meeting on the city calendar, link to all the documents, they're listed, I'll pull up in a second on the screen, but they're listed there by amendment and docket number. And you can look at all the attachments, including the revised versions of one or two of the amendments. So should there be any further revisions, you can look there. You may also look to in the coming weeks or months, depending on how this conversation goes. You may also follow the City Council Planning and Development Subcommittee pages because they're depending on where these things go, that may evolve there or have further revisions or drafting there.
At one point, we had a hand online, so I just want to put it back out. For anybody online that wants to make comment, raise your hand and we'll call on you. Don't see any hands.
Okay, we will close public comment. Continue discussion with the board and
I'll just go again, just as a reminder for everybody, obviously, you may look at each of these amendments like somewhat differently. So obviously you'll have to parse off whether or not, you're moving one way with one way with another, and how you want to handle those also procedurally moving forward.
Could you just, in response to public comment, could you pull up the map? Oh, 221.
Yes.
Show where the.
Yes. Perhaps for clarification here, and I'll sponsors, but I think the clarification from this map essentially is that the R2 that you're seeing outside of these red outlined areas, these yellow areas here, are the National Register Historic District, which is our demolition control overlay district. That area would not be encompassed by this change as it's been amended, or it's been provided by the sponsors of the committee right now. It would encompass these areas here that are outlined in red.
Except the building.
I'm sorry?
Except the building height?
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Except,
Yes.
except for the building height, yes.
so should we respond to the concerns that I've noticed?
Yeah, you want me to? Yeah. I mean, again, I'm more than happy to follow up with questions or whatnot. I'm not seeing anything thus far under that umbrella of needing re-advertisement. We do try to be specific enough with the advertisements so that people can know whether this zoning amendment might interest them. It's true that there's not a mailer that goes out to every property owner or everybody who has a residential property that might be affected by it. But I'm not sure of the scope of yet, and it really depends on the council and the planning board's evolution of discussion here. I'm not sure what the threshold is yet where it needs to be re-advertised. However, that is a reasonable consideration at some point, depending on, whether or not other alterations are made in committee, so to speak. That would be something procedurally to consider. I'm not convinced that we're there just yet.
Could we parse out these, take one of these amendments out to begin with? And it seems like the
like 220 doesn't have a lot of conflict.
I tend to agree, yeah.
Would it be appropriate to make a motion to recommend? I haven't heard anything against it. Would it be appropriate to make a motion to recommend in favor of that, just to get that handled?
I agree with that approach. Speaking for you on substance, but I agree with that approach. Definitely, put in the docket, so to speak, for more time to be spent on the board debate.
So I would like to make that motion that the planning board recommends in favor of adopting ordinance 220 as written.
I'll second.
Do this by show of hands. All those in favor?
Then do we want to take one at a time?
I would suggest 218. 218 is the next level.
It was a general one, just for everyone's education on posting, because I think that's the confusion on the language we use. Maybe the planning director could say, so when we post for public hearing, do we have an attorney? Do we have it reviewed? How? Because I can see what people mean. Like if you don't know what FAR means, I'm looking at it here, like adding FAR. There's a little confusion on saying what that means. Is that right? Like, am I seeing the right posting here?
Yeah, perhaps context as best as I can anyway, so years of experience as a planner. We don't run every legal advertisement for every zoning amendment that is run by, sort of by legal counsel, so to speak. It's done by, these years of experience based on how things are handled. It is not common these days to post the entirety of a zoning amendment in the papers. You can imagine the cost that would be depending on the amendment. So normally what happens is there's a summary of that provided in the advertisement, and then you're pointing folks to where they can get more information. So here the advertisement is meant to be written broad, specific enough to define the scope of the area that's being discussed here, but broadly enough such recognizing that as the council tinkers with hundreds of pages of zoning ordinance, text, that it may have to tinker with this provision or that provision while working in these areas. I realize there may be a difference of opinion on that. We can perhaps further discussion. However, having said that, the intent with these advertisements is to try to provide as much specificity as possible while also allowing the council to not necessarily have to re-advertise every time they have a meeting because they decide to tweak this thing or that thing. That is not uncommon to try to handle things in that manner. So with that, I'm more than happy to follow up after this with others or with the council and planning board or legal counsel.
I'd like someone to recognize Lisa Me. Not gonna recognize Lisa Me?
Yeah, does someone want to recognize Attorney Mead?
You're asking to reopen the public.
You can.
Well, I think, did you officially close public comment? And we don't have our city solicitor here, is that right?
We do not.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to talk to the advertisement. Today, you essentially added a zoning district. A couple days ago, you added to the purpose section, which was never advertised. You've added new definitions and you've changed the way things are calculated. It's clearly outside the original advertisement because you have to look at what you advertised initially. And I totally disagree. It requires a re-advertisement. Otherwise, you jeopardize zoning, so that's fine. You can do that too.
Yeah, I think the substance of the other parties here, having looked at the text in that advertisement, I do think it's sufficient to describe the scope. Again, I'm more than happy to follow up with others. It does talk about amending FAR and providing dimensional adjustments for residential properties. So, yeah, I will be happy to look at that. I'm sure folks will be interested in also to do something.
Well, we'll close.
I guess my comments, I listened to everything, I don't think speed is gonna help us here. Right? I think there was enough discussion about needing more work than done so that with a re-advertisement or repackaging of the ordinance be detrimental to the long-term benefit of working through. That's kind of my reactions. I guess that would be the responses.
If I could, so just speak a little bit to what we heard in public comment. We've had 2 public meetings, not counting the council introduction of these matters so far. This is our third. I would expect we would have a minimum of 2 additional once the planning board has finished their work, which I'm not making any assumptions about that happening in 1 or 2 meetings. With regard to speed, I think we're going at the pace that, the sponsors and the feedback dictates. Secondly, I think from a zoning language development process, this is not that normal to me in my experience in terms of starting with a proposed amendment, gathering input, hearing feedback from the public, absorbing that, and making adjustments to the language. I agree that if we have an opinion from our solicitor planning office that we deviated too far, I agree with the reading of the notice at this point that we're still, in my mind, in those bounds. But to further on the process, once we are complete on the planning board's feedback, that's the point at which we would start to consider and vote on actual amendments to the original proposed amendment. So right to this point, all we've done is basically have a large amount of introduction and feedback gathering for the public process. Now we're having a feedback gathering both from the public and the planning board. And then I would expect that we'll have several meetings in front of us to continue to absorb that and find consensus, right? Because this, both the members of the committee that will have to approve any amendments to these, as well as for the council to, so just that, not going as fast as I would. It seems on paper.
This is following up on, I think, a suggestion the planning board made. So our next meeting is, the planning board is scheduled for May 6th. But there are 2 planning and development committee meetings between now and then. And so I guess the 2 between now and.
Possibly.
Okay, well, I know 2. So I guess the question that has been raised is, would the planning board want to host a meeting, well, perhaps continue, I'm not sure exactly how to do this, but host a meeting on either or both of those planning and development committee nights so that we're talking together, having separate conversations.
Yeah, and if I could just a little bit of context for folks, not every community does this. I actually think it's a good practice in Newburyport. It's been done the entire time I've been here. It's actually codified in the ordinance, but the assumption here is that the city council has a joint public hearing with the planning board. I think that's good because it allows that collaboration discussion together. There are instances in other communities where that's an entirely separate conversation and there's a report that's going there, to the council or the town meeting or whatnot. So I think that's good practice. I think the question, it varies from time to time in amendment to amendment, or how big the amendment is. But we have tried in recent time, and it's worked pretty well using planning board dates. We have a lot of we have 9 planning board members, we have 11 city councilors. Because the city council's planning development committee has 3 members, it's more typical to have the 3 members with the planning board. We usually work off the planning board dates. However, it's been noted that there are some planning and development subcommittee meetings the council has between now and the next couple of weeks. Looking at available dates, looking at the timeframes, folks might want to move along and have some discussion about this. It's really up to all of you to sort of decide, do you want to, if you're continuing any aspects of this as opposed to closing it out, and wrapping up the planning board hearing, for instance, on the amendment we just had a motion on, it may be a question here of whether or not you want to continue to one of those dates, jointly essentially continue this matter versus some other date. So that was kind of the question here, was using a council existing date versus a planning board existing date.
And I guess to follow up on that, the distinction between a planning board meeting and a joint public hearing, I don't know whether this is possible, but to essentially have to meet with the planning and development committee as a working planning board meeting, but to actually continue the public hearing planning board meeting. Does that make sense, or
I would recommend you keep the continuity.
Okay.
I guess I would treat that as a public hearing. I think having some discussion together is deliberation, maybe circling back after that for more public comment in the process, but I guess I would try to keep that continuity of a public hearing as opposed to saying we're outside the public hearing on this discussion, then we're coming back into the public hearing for discussion at a future meeting in the same. For the planning board's purposes in particular, I guess, under statute.
My concern is, do we get more work done more of a workshop.
I completely understand the process. I think that frankly is one of the reasons why I know I had said at a prior planning and development committee meeting, at least, as a best practice, it is sometimes helpful, and I always note here in public comment, it is helpful to have a higher level kind of policy discussion. Because then before you're into the weeds of the language, I describe it as sort of policy level discussion, then pulling out the toolbox, in this case zoning or land use regulations, and saying those are the tools in the toolbox, talking about which tools or provisions make sense, and then going into the words, the drafting, and sometimes when we get into the weeds of the drafting first, it becomes hard to figure out if we're heading in the right direction. So that is partly for that reason, and partly because when you get into that formal setting, you're required to follow a statutory procedure, you have to deal with forms and so forth. It becomes a little bit more cumbersome to work through those issues for the reason I think maybe you're certainly correct in trying to get.
I would recommend if for consideration of the chair and planning board members, the 28th would be before your next scheduled meeting on the 6th, I believe, and not on the calendar yet, but we have agreement to meet that night.
I won't be there.
Is it just for the planning board members? Is that assumed to be a 6 p.m. or
Be a 6
p.m.
but we can adjust.
What about the
For purposes of the 21st, we have very little time and a couple of appointments that we need to consider already, so I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to get into the meat of it. Yes.
I'd just like to acknowledge something the public has been saying, which is that this 221 was introduced 3 weeks ago. When was it introduced? Not long ago. And it's changed now for the third time. And that change has been posted on the day of the public meeting. So I want to acknowledge as someone who is, as you, as someone who sat on the public side, that was driven me crazy. And it's also been difficult for me as a counselor to follow something that I do think needs careful analysis when it keeps changing. So I would like to acknowledge the frustration of the public on this. It's already changed substantially since it was first introduced. Now I know that it will go through a lot of more changes, and that's fair given all the public comment, given how important and broad an amendment it is. But can there be some sort of rules going forward about when amendments are sort of provided to the public in advance of public comment? Because people don't know what to comment. And I think improvements are made.
I
know it's all.
Sure. The approach that we took this evening was to first present an update so that the public heard the latest. I have the amended versions that we post to each of our planning and development meetings show progression of those changes. I think as a sponsor, I asked you for that as well, of a different amendment. But so that is the rule, is that we're trying to guide the public with the latest information and post a document that.
Just so members of the public need to prepare if they really have something at stake or a big interest in something like that. And they want to prepare for a public meeting, a public hearing, then they need some time to see the changes, to be able to digest them, to change their mind about what they think about it. And that's not, it's not 24 hours. I know, I've been on that. So I'm just wondering if there could be some ground rules about when the public gets to, about when they're posted, 3 hours before meeting doesn't work. I'm sorry? 3 hours before meeting doesn't work.
If I may, irrespective of the particulars of the procedure and so forth in general, just that as a best practice, normally that is a reason or a justification for saying we need a little bit more time to work, do this in the body, or to take additional public comment. Just as a general fact, normal ways to we have the context here without talking about a specific deadline. So,
Andy, don't we have a rule that we require submission a week before? If you're not a week before clear, you don't get heard that night.
Correct.
Is that?
Correct. No, just I'm not suggesting otherwise. No, I agree. What Brian is referring to is for applicants to the board, there's a deadline. The expectation is certainly no less than a week before the meeting. Any updated plans and so forth are coming in. I think you're suggesting here essentially using that as a potentially, at least as some sort of measure for, a week advance notice, maybe before something.
Just get clarity too on something, and maybe this might help people a little bit, I think. This joint hearing here starts the timeline, right? The clock in trying to do something for 90 days.
Close it.
Sorry, we didn't close it yet, right? So this date though, this is our first joint meeting, and this is the one that's publicly posted, right? So, and it was set for April 15th, and I think I'm now understanding some of the confusion, because this posting came out, March 30th is the first publication, and then April 6th. Right? Yeah, that's what I have here. So I think what's unusual here, I think the sponsors were, really trying to get feedback on the ordinance, which is why we had a planning and development committee meeting, which was helpful because we got to see it, we got to make some comments and amend it. But I think the order was a little, instead of that happening in this joint open public posted one, we already started a little bit.
The last meeting,
Yeah.
city council meeting.
Yeah, so I think that's a little different from my practice. But it's different than our typical zoning process for the joint hearing to start. So I think that's where the confusion is a little bit, because I too got a little confused on when was the first ordinance introduced.
Yeah. Just to make a distinction here, that's under the statute, the state statute, the expectation is that the planning board itself, as a sort of long-term planning, right, sort of, advisory body, looks at the amendment and provides guidance to either town meeting or the city council. It has been, every community is a little different how they handle certain things. Cities are going to work a little bit differently than towns. But maybe to your point, if you're trying to have continuity or one continuous conversation of all the bodies together, I know the city council here has a different time depending on the amendment. Sometimes said, we're going to go back to our own committee, have a discussion. And I think sometimes even in between a posted zoning hearing, going back to the planning development city council meeting, having further discussion of its own, then circling back to the planning board again. And that's something you may want to sort out with the council. But you may want to sort out how you want to handle that, both for now or for future amendments as best as for our ability. The council does have its own purview to do that sort of thing. I think it's perhaps more, the continuity piece is more tied to the planning board process and the statute, but it would probably make sense either way to sort out when those conversations are segmented. Probably we're getting at the public may not know the continuity of those or which meetings to attend. We're talking here in the hearing about continues to a date, and some of that discussion may or may not be happening in other meetings.
Right.
So for the planning board, an opportunity to continue the meeting for 28. So I think I'd like a motion related to that.
I'll make a motion to continue.
All those in favor? Opposed? So we will continue public discussion.
So it makes sense to do that. I think it's 6 p.m. So the assumption is 6 p.m. But I also want to clarify with the committee chair. The assumption is this would be in the city council chambers in that instance. Now, so we're referring to a city council meeting. So we're going to go to their space, which in this case would be actually at city hall in the city council chambers. To clarify, it might be a little tight to squeeze in there. Putting the audience, and then turn on and so forth. But that's the room that we would be in just for advance notice as much as possible. Again, look at the city calendar. We post that information. It would make sense, yeah.
Question, so, comment for that meeting, can we potentially agree to like freeze changes going to that meeting for the public benefit? Make sure that going through the version that we reviewed today is the version we're reviewing then. Maybe changes we want to be responsive to, but it would be add confusion if they add yet another revision. We most certainly would.
So it looks like we have agreement with sponsors, which are one, so.
Yeah,
I will-
great.
Just a point of information, does that require, the meeting on the 28th, does that require a 14-day notice like this meeting did?
No, this is the continuity is from the notice at this meeting.
Continuing it.
It goes to that meeting. So yeah, you're giving the notice here. Folks are calling and asking, I wasn't there, and we tell them today, but they're here and they get the continuity.
And you are going to check with legal about the
Yes.
possibility of
Oh, yes, yeah. And again, should that change, as we go into discussion, even after that opinion and where we land, even if there's further discussion, then obviously that's always something that we kind of monitor, so to speak. Yes, I will circle back on that.
Thank you.
And to specify for my committee, we're motion to close the public hearing on ordinance 220.
Yeah, oh, sorry, if I could, I also wanted to recommend, because then we may not have actually, what we have provided recommendation, just making clear for that one, we might be closing this hearing, closing it off, such that the only two that remaining for your purposes, I could be wrong about that, I want to defer to you, but it sounded like that's where the planning board was sort of parsing off one of them, leaving the other
So you
two.
need that motion for closing.
It would make sense just for the, maybe for the audience's purposes, and understanding that that one is no longer being handled by the planning board, so to speak. Then the council will be able to just.
That's 220.
Sorry.
Yes,
Yes.
So I would make a motion to close the planning board hearing for ordinance 220.
All those in favor? Oh,
They've just put the other two amendments, 218 and 221, going to the 21st next Tuesday. Or sorry, 28, sorry, it is 28. Yeah.
Okay. Now, motion to close the public hearing on your side works.
So.
All those in favor? Then a motion to continue the public hearing on our side, like April 21 and 218 to April 28th at 6 p.m. at City Council chambers.
So.
All those in favor? Aye.
Okay, thank you for.
thank you.
Yeah.
How you doing?
We're the planning board. We have general business. 22 Henry Drive.
Yes. Yeah, again, I have no particular question about this one myself. I mean, this is the one. So, yeah, sorry, it wasn't expected to be a presentation tonight. You typically, it's sort of a question of, do you have enough information to mobilize and go to your subsequent meeting, an actual opening of the hearing to look at the application itself? We've talked before, and we'll talk more in the future about whether we sort of streamline that process or change the way that is handled, but board takes a vote to determine whether the application is complete. The office didn't have any particular objection to get the application material or materials you have to work with, but that's.
No change to the physical building, no change to the site, just a change in use. Tenant occupancy.
That's a little golf or club or whatever the.
Uses that are not currently.
So the site plan, I don't know what's the site plan shows all the parking spaces marked out. There's a notation saying we're not marking out. What's going on?
Sorry, marking a meeting for each use, you mean, is it?
No, just saying, it shows if you look at the site plan, it shows it as if they were painted. But then there's a note that says not painting.
Yeah.
So do we require painted parking spaces?
Yes, I would definitely expect it as a normal protocol. I mean,
But I guess that's my question, is the application complete for that?
if the lines are shown and you're not satisfied with the lines, that's.
Well, I'm satisfied with mine. I just can't tell whether, if you show the plan.
Sorry,
Because it's very confusing.
Do we take into consideration how many parking spaces there's supposed to be? Is that not?
Well, we have to take that into consideration, but the question is,
But they're not strike.
are they complying with design? So if you look at, there's a, I think in that note, maybe in the middle of the parking lot.
Spaces that are striped on the site, when you can see, when you're coming to the site, I think you can see the line on the right is the most obvious.
Right, I mean, well, actually, the cars that you went to park.
Well, I guess in either event, you're definitely gonna want to have, I guess the bottom line is you have a lines that you're showing the spaces are, I think you always want them painted in the field to match, so it's going here, right? And if it's inadequate today, do you need more information now, or is it just a question of working out the plan changes with the applicant?
Well, I guess what I'm getting at here is, it seems like a simple project, it seems like it should be something we should be able to do in one day.
Yes.
But if there aren't painted spaces there, they might come to us and say, we're not gonna do anything, then we've got this confusion. What they're being asked to do, they're asking for waivers, that kind of
Sorry, so you're okay with the layout per se?
I'm okay with the layout.
But you want to make sure it's straight on the ground.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so again, and from my perspective, that's easily not resolved one way or the other. I'm just saying as part of the permit, there's got to be striping that matches on the ground, period. And so I guess from my perspective, I see that as not necessarily an incomplete application, but more so making sure at the end of the day, there's specific condition is that everything on the site from the striping has to match your plan.
And then another question is related to that.
Yeah.
If you look at the lower left part of that plan, those parking spaces look like they have spaces, so I don't know.
Oh, yes, and that I think is legitimate. That to me, like, I guess there's a little bit of nuance to that because of the existing conditions, right? So I think that is something that's probably best, when you get into the hearing, looking at the plan with them to talk about, kind of like we did with the wave, and I think, projector or taking off. But wouldn't wave when there was a question about the turning around and backing around some of the days. Some of the thing, is this practical? Does it need to be adjusted? Is this the right number of spaces that can really practically fit?
So I guess that was my own concern.
And we can flag those concerns for the applicant.
that's it.
Yeah.
Before they come in.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. We do try to, as best as possible, to relay questions or concerns, issues that arise, so that they can be better prepared, if it is possible, that you want to run a, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's, I mean, as I say, I think the plan in general was, like,
Yeah.
you might do something different with the parking spaces, to make sure you, they can all fit in.
Yeah.
Because it looks like it's
Yeah, perfectly legitimate, especially since we just saw, I guess, even conceptually, the market basket one where it's like completely, perfectly, I'm not saying the perfect plan, but it's perfectly clearly described with normal bay widths and all that.
So just, that was my concern from the point of view of making a vote to say that this is a complete.
Yes, I think the application materials are sufficient to move ahead to the site plan hearing, however, the plan itself may not be adequate to get, and we may have to have a discussion about some of these details, and we can relay some of those questions or concerns to the applicant, so they can attempt to try to address or upload the plan or update it or provide further information in advance of your meeting.
Thank you.
I make the motion that the applications. Second.
All those in favor? Opposed?
So we'll have this back and forth, I'll relay those messages and, hopefully we'll get some further clarification and maybe adjustment.
Can I ask a question about speeding? So how does it work? What's our role right now? We advise the city council, we provide recommendations. That's what we do, that's what we're doing.
I'm sorry, under this, where we just called them.
That's fine. The ordinance.
Yeah, the assumption here, it has been done in different ways, whether it's verbal or written and so forth. And sometimes there's a more thorough written report by the board. Depends on the amendment, what you want to do and how you want to handle it. Sometimes there's enough of an opinion where it's pretty clear and you have a written opinion saying city council would recommend adoption. Sometimes it's we recommend you do further study or analysis on this or that. In some cases, you might have decided you want to keep the discussion open together because you're not even done with the planning board. But normally there's some sort of written.
Sorry, we would keep the conversation together because what?
If you feel that the amendment is there's still too much at play in there, you may say, city council, we're not quite done yet in reviewing this in an advisory capacity, and therefore we just like to keep this open for you, put up a date. Whereas you might find one of them that you were okay to close the planning board hearing process under the statute, say, we no longer need to take an advisory role. This one, we're able to give you that advice, with our decision tonight. That is now being relayed to the city council, and they'll have it in mind. But you would be keeping open the other ones that are,
Sort of what I'm asking. So Rick, you provided some comments ahead of time, right? For the amendments.
which are posted. Yeah.
Oh, they are.
I'm sorry, the opposite, the opposite posted. Yours and
Right,
Jerry.
because that was before it
You and Jerry.
it was more, it came out of, it was more comments on the planning and development committee.
Correct. Yeah, there's a carryover, and it's actually something I discussed with Ben as the chair of the committee, was especially if they parse out here, it goes to the planning and development committee, there's an accumulation of documents that relate to these things, right? And so to the degree they came in the city council side, the planning board side, right now, I'll post it.
Yeah, so just to be clear, because it hadn't come to us yet, my comments were from me, they weren't from me as a.
Well, that was my biggest question right there. That's what-
So it did make that.
There's nobody that comments back.
So just one thing to add to your question. Under state law, the city council cannot vote to adopt the amendment until the planning board has made its recommendation, until a certain number of days.
Yeah, 45 days.
45 days. So we have to make a recommendation or the action can take place for a certain number of days.
Okay, so just so I understand the procedure, so for this particular matter, we're going to discuss it with the planning board, or we're discussing it jointly?
Jointly, continuing.
And then we give a recommendation at that moment, or do we?
We can make it, we can keep going afterwards.
It's all.
There's a big reason I'm asking these questions.
But if we're not gonna run out the clock.
Just my point of view.
The clock is not running on this yet.
The clock starts running when we close. So we can, so we're continuing it now to the 28th. The
Can we-
28th, we might continue it. And, you're optimistic. And then the point at which we close the public hearing, then we could still be discussing. But the close the public hearing. So if we close the public hearing on the sixth,
The council has 90 days after that. They cannot act until the city council, this planning board's been given 45 days to get written, you know. Guidance. Yeah, the bunch of procedural, gymnastics, but
And if we don't want to do it, so we continue with it?
so if we don't, we can recommend against it, they can still adopt it. They don't have to follow our.
you're just advising, you're just.
But Charlie, the work product that we produce doesn't have to be in the joint meeting.
Right.
It could be after, we can take that and we write it. And
That's how we-
they can explain
I mean,
it.
I.
We can dissent, right? We don't all have to be.
Right.
We did that.
But this is that we would want to make sure that after the 28th, we fairly quickly have an opportunity to discuss together.
I'm saying, I agree. There's a follow-up.
Yeah.
Saying what I'm saying, because I think we as a board need to have confidence that this is the right approach. And I'm not at that point.
I was trying not to say, what we talked about in our pre-meeting was, it's not fair to everybody here to feel like they're rushing to try to get their opinion in when the thing hasn't even been solidified that we may not like. Right? So to me, it's work product comes, we have input, but then we say, okay, does this make sense? And then make our opinion, and we'll have time.
Okay. I'm good.
And there's all of this.
I just want to.
Discussion that we had around Island Avenue. And, you know, we were talking about this all the other day, that one of the fundamental issues with the lot width, 90 foot lot, is very out of character with the older neighborhood. And that doesn't change with what they're suggesting. I want to kind of unwind this whole thing. Really. What the purpose is, what the goal is this the best way forward?
I would really love this. I'm going to frame this as preparation for the joint meeting on the 28th, which is, it became clear to me that I wasn't quite clear what problem they thought they were solving. Mansionization is actually not necessarily mean the same thing to everybody, right? Therefore, I could not understand why they were proposing these solutions, because I did not understand what problem they were solving. There was also no data or evidence offered in, and by the way, this is not knee-jerk negativity. It may be that this is a really well thought out solution to an identified problem with a ton of data. But since it wasn't there, I felt very challenged in considering it. I would find it less helpful to go into the 28th without some more of that. And I don't know whether the sponsors, who have probably done a ton of work and thinking and research about that, could provide some of that background prior to the 28th, or whether we could request that part of the 28th be that contextualized.
What would be helpful would be some of the examples, like we talked about, do an example of certain lots to get a real feel for what those restrictions would mean. And I didn't talk about that, which that would be helpful.
To your point, mansionization, I think that's not a helpful term to use. I think the issue is consistency, compatibility with neighborhood. Mansionization automatically makes it a class.
But they do seem to be talking about affordability and access.
Right.
They're talking about the ability to access a home purchase, and that is actually separate from consistency and fit in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and
So it seems like we're maybe trying to solve two different
and
problems.
along with that, if we're allowing larger structures to allow two-family uses than single-family uses, then that's the scale. It kind of mixes up the scale of affordability.
Yes, I agree.
Just to the procedure, to the extent you're able to, I would recommend trying to keep the continuity of discussion related to the deliberation of the amendments. Just to avoid, further.
So can we make some requests going into the 28th, because our time on the 28th is well spent?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, to the extent that it hasn't been noted already, we're more than happy to kind of work with you to relay it, as we were already going to be doing, essentially have that in front of the sponsors. some materials to post, to your point, but we try to communicate everything we're hearing here with these, folks get more information just like an applicant. So, we're happy to relay those things. Those things can also be conveyed directly to those folks. And so again, to the end extent there's anything else available, recognizing it's only 2 weeks, but whatever is available, that will be posted again as well. And, again, it's up to them and, the parties to figure out what can be done at that time.
But did they post any supporting documents that I missed with that?
Everything that we have accumulated so far, other than maybe some miscellaneous comments that might have come in emails on my preview, but basically the documents are all posted with the amendments right now, and the assumption is that would be supplemented with anything new coming in.
So I guess what I would comment, Jen, as I listen to you, I don't look at it as we're under any time constraint. It's got to mature. I heard a lot of different competing things. I heard some things that made no sense. If they need time between now and the 28th, maybe on the 28th is when they start that analysis that gets us later. I don't look at it like we got to prep and get information to us. I just don't think we're there. I'm not mentally there. Right? Just not.
Two things different. One is just this is just one of the pages, right? One of the amendments. It shows the purposes, right? The council packet, the sponsor memo with the purpose. There's the hearing notice. There's supplementary tables they gave us.
I guess I'm looking for more context, more research, more evidence, if such exists.
Oh, definitely, yeah, understood. I do think the sponsors heard that tonight, but I definitely will follow up with that and see what they're able to gather. It might be a question.
It's the 15th, right? So they're going to need time. It's not like someone's going to go and do an analysis. It's like, so I look at it like hopefully and they have to post it, right? So we have that same dilemma. If it's the day of the next meeting, we're going to have the same dilemma we have now. So it's almost like make the request and say, let us know when you're going to have that. And then it's got to be a week prior. I think we're doing everyone a service versus debating words that we don't even believe. I can debate words, but I don't believe it. Yeah, I'm just trying to pick the best of the lot of words.
Well, they said they're not going to change anything at all. So it's really just gathering data. And some of that, I guess, could be gained through the zoning administrator in the next 2 weeks, some little snapshot.
Yeah, again, just to reiterate something that Jennifer and I were trying to come with and test for ability is, because we're not sure what the things are planning, the dimensions have been adjusted a little bit in terms of the markup rate, doing a proper analysis where we feel confident in the data sets we're using, the accuracy of the numbers we're calculating, and the implication. That is not something we, the office, have not been able to say we've done a thorough analysis over the years. Maybe the sponsor done a certain analysis, we don't know how cursory that was, but it's looking at only things like lot area and setback. There's also taking into account setbacks that exist for structures. Again, the more complicated the analysis, the more dimensions as well. That takes time. That's complexity. Not all lots are the same. You might have a debate about whether snapshot shown in this neighborhood here is representative of that entire scope of area. And so, even if a snapshot is done in one area, we might still have a discussion here about whether that's large enough to encompass all the areas involved. So, one of the procedural things, just in general, these amendments, regardless of whether it's these or others, is if you feel that something's complicated enough, it's up to you and the city council what you do here. But if it's complicated enough, it might be one of those questions of, is it so complicated that by tracking out for months on end and doing all that, is that something that maybe does just as a clarity perspective, sort of getting people all confused? It's that point in itself, just sort of the best practice start. That's the problem with the for everybody. Recommending that said, it's got to be decided all bodies, but that was sort of suggested by some. You'll have to decide. Is it in that category where it needs so much work that, and the reason I say that is only because of the awkward, unfortunate fact of the state statute that basically says these changes are essentially, if adopted, retroactively back to the date of first advertisement. So, for instance, you can imagine if it goes on for weeks or months, that leaves folks in limbo. People don't necessarily know. That again is one good reason for trying to have early discussion before sponsoring, because then you're in a Jennifer is right now juggling other applicants whose zoning determination of what relief is needed might be modified in that interim time. And so those folks might be in limbo. And that's, I don't know what that spectrum is. She's seeing it, but we know there are some people who have reached out saying they're concerned about that, and it might grow depending on how many people are in that time frame. So I guess it's
to me, but let me oversimplify the discussion, because I think this is what I heard, but be interested in those. What I heard is that the 10,000 square foot minimum lot for R2, the 90-foot frontage to doesn't change. What changes is the size of house that you can build on that 10,000 square foot, which to me doesn't get you there. You still have a lot that's too big. And, you know, I can argue relative to the 1,850 square feet. Me, you get there by creating smaller lots, less frontage, houses that are closer together, and then the scale starts to fall into place. But saying that we get that density only by allowing a two-family on that 10,000. That density. So that's kind of where I am.
So what it says to me though, what I think we said, agree with you is it needs to be repackaged and thought through. Just,
You know, we've been working at Paradigm where most things that get proposed get through. I have no issue with something that's poorly conceived, poorly researched and doesn't work, failing. I don't have any issue.
Right. Like just take your time. It takes a year to get it right from inception, which was in March, to March. So be it, because this is a fundamental change. This isn't tweaking language to consider things. And
The first thing I'm gonna look at tomorrow is the last comment that was made was about the cottage court zoning.
We all know. I just also, I feel really strongly about this, that it is not clear to me whether we are solving an aesthetic problem. And I know we also have our problems with the word aesthetic and how it is defined, where we don't want essentially overmapping, right? Or inconsistent design. But we're willing to take that if it allows for more units of housing. But those are solving two different problems.
Yeah.
And I would just like to understand, not because I have a preference about what problem we solve first. I would like to try to solve one problem with one solution.
I will say just, and you might have to go on this, but unfortunately, there are schools that might touch more than one public policy issue, so you might be.
But this was not made clear which ones we're trying to solve and which one.
I think, but each person might be approaching it for two reasons, or the, the outcome might be affecting more than one, right? It's
right. But if the only problem that we're solving here is mansionization, if the problem that's framed here is mansionization, I don't actually know which multiple public policy issues we might be addressing.
So the cottage court.
I
think public policy discussion comes first.
Yeah, I agree.
Where are you trying to achieve? Then pull on the toolbox. Yeah.
I also think to the extent, I also think, and maybe this is outside of our purview, but you asked us to stick to process. I do think that for something as significant as this, right? There is sticking to the letter of the law of process, and then there is doing something that is far likely to result in a better, less politically charged environment for a solution to take hold. And I just think this seems like a moment where we should be encouraging that second approach rather than the letter.
Well said.
So one thing that I think we should remember, which hasn't happened in Newburyport, I think, but under state law, planning on its own.
Yeah.
We think that there's a different approach. If we like what Rachel said,
she has a great.
we could, I mean, I could say, I don't know how long. We should go back to making the R2 district singles and duplexes, and the R3 district single duplex and multi by right. And that's what she was saying. She was saying to do that. I think that's.
There is this issue that I would really move. Sorry, the issue, if I think the implications of talking about mansionization and class clustering and all these things that are not great if it results in a solution that is so overly burdensome in terms of cost, in terms of navigating the systems that you would need to navigate to be permissive, then you are doing a different kind of blustering. Right.
Slowing it
And so
all.
I think we would also want to understand, what I didn't hear from them was an assessment of how the solution would impact the people in it who tried to navigate it.
I like the idea of the planning board coming up with it.
I mean, if you look at Highland Avenue was handicapped by 90-foot square foot. So what would Highland Avenue look like if there were 6 smaller houses rather than 4 big lots?
Exactly.
That to me is where we ought to be. I think that kind of formula, that kind of zoning, which allows.
It felt, I'll say this, it feels very political. It's agenda driven. Nationalization would just bother me from the get-go. So I think we might need to say, we don't have that kind of agenda. We're trying to solve a problem.
Yeah, beautiful. Across a large swath of properties.
Yeah, housing production.
Right.
Yes.
But if we say the housing production plan, we do need to be cognizant, which I would be delighted by. We need to be cognizant that that is actually quite
Yes.
different. They're also proposing an aesthetic and neighborhood, identity maintenance.
Yeah, you can't just say we're trying to preserve affordable housing and then make an exclusionary zoning policy. Like, yeah, I don't think you get in the really.
We all know.
A couple of other quick items. I'm gonna push the approval of minutes off or at least the next meeting.
Do we have those? Yeah, they're in the bottom of the post.
That's no fault of one. So we'll just carry those to the next meeting.
Tomorrow night is board commission.
Yes, I was not, so. Jamie's board?
Wait, also, Jamie, did I get replaced on the CPC because I wasn't here that night?
Yeah.
I told you wanted to be.
Yeah.
That's true.
Her understanding.
No, it's super fun.
Next time,
Just
TK.
for me.
So. Talking about board commission.
So.
Yeah.
Somebody has.
Yeah, so Christine Jackson, the mayor's office reached out, it happens, we try to do it once a year, once a commission, everybody's interested, you have a town pool ready, people ready to go. We have vacancies, it's supposed to happen again for a while, it doesn't happen here, but as much on other boards it does. So if you're able to cover that at all, it's 5:30, I think it starts, the council.
I'll go, I can trade it.
Yeah, I will be floating because I have multiple boards we work with, right, so I'll be balancing. The other thing is I also have to go to a city council meeting at 6, so I'll be there for a half hour. So if anybody can be there for an hour and a half, or cover some portion of that together, you could be there to be, if someone else is interested in planning board, just walk by, you could say, here's what we do, or, that kind of thing. So it's up to you here.
Five members only.
Yeah, right.
So,
We're not precluded.
That's how.
Where is that?
That one else means.
That's.
Yeah. Brian agreed, yes. Wait, where is that?
It's so boards and commissions, it's in city auditorium, it's very long, and it's 5:30 p.m. I believe tomorrow night.
Motion to adjourn.
Any other?
No, just the working group, hopefully. Associates. Sorry, they did. No chance to take a look. SM did email something late today, but I was doing with this meeting, prepping all this other stuff. So I will check that. He may have had some slide deck or something like that. It wasn't anything new. I did send him note from the last meeting. I still owe a link to the OneDrive where we're putting all the docs. I didn't bring the loop today, just interrupt with stuff. So I'll send it out tonight or tomorrow morning, and then we'll meet with Cam. We'll pick up where we left it off. We'll walk about our public meeting process. We're voting. Tentatively, we're thinking that a first public meeting, giving us some kind of work with the consultant, but first initial meeting with the general public on May 20th, potentially using a regular planning board date. That we already have established meeting, we already have you available, we already have this room available. And we can say, all right, maybe that night is sort of exclusively focused on this, right? And so, we work with Cable Associates. I think we should think about how we want that meeting to run. We've already talked about it as a group and we can pick that up, but how we want it to run, how we have breakout tables, get input from people, the best, possible questions to, stimulate them to kind of keep, as much broad, spectrum to give us not the kind of prejudice in anything, but also give questions that could stimulate the type of questions like, what's the right person for, So, anyway, if you have thoughts on that, we'll also talk about more, examples from other places to kind of help the team to understand what we might be looking for, so we can, aim in the right direction as we go into that and then beyond, so. Other than that, we'll circle back.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
That's the voice of the secretary.